At a typical high school in Japan, a girl catches everyone's attention wherever she goes. Her name is Alisa Kujo, but everyone calls her Alia. With a Russian father, Alia not only has the highest grades in school, but also excels in sports. She is also the treasurer of the student council. All these qualities make Alia one of the most sought-after girls among her peers. One of those who couldn't resist her charm was Ando, a second-year student. Acting cool as always, he introduced himself and asked her out for lunch, but she declined without a second thought. To save some face, he asked if he could at least get her phone number, but she said no because she had no interest in him whatsoever. After humiliating the boy to close the deal, she remarked that his necklace was against the school rules, living up to her role in the student council. After this little spectacle, people around were left wondering how this girl could reject the most desired guy in school so effortlessly. When Alia arrived in the classroom, she encountered the same interested looks from the boys she passed. Sitting at the back of the room, she greeted her friend Q's with a good morning, but he didn't wake up. So she kicked his chair and asked if he stayed up late watching anime again. He confessed that he was up until dawn debating with an otaku friend about the latest episode they watched. Acting all proper, Alia scolded him, saying he was an idiot for sacrificing his sleep for cartoons, leaving him tired and sleepy at school the next day. If being an idiot means professing your love for a work of art without being bound by time, then Q's accepted the insult gladly. Regardless, the boy couldn't help but yawn from exhaustion, and in one of those yawns Alia said something in Russian to him. Q's asked what she said, and she explained that she called him pathetic. Not paying much attention, Q's noticed it was time for chemistry class, but since he didn't bring his materials, he asked to share with his friend. However, his sudden interest started fading as the teacher wrote words like estrogen, tungsten, and oxygen on the board. To prevent her friend from falling asleep again, Alia poked him in the ribs with a pen, making him impulsively raise his hand. The problem was that the teacher had just asked what the second most abundant chemical element in the universe was, leaving Q's in a tight spot. To help him out, Alia discreetly pointed to one of the elements on the periodic table, so Q's answered strontium. Disappointed, the teacher said the answer was wrong, and then asked Alia next. Cynically, she answered helium, which was correct, leaving Q's shocked at how terribly he had been tricked. After the embarrassment, Q's confronted her about the prank, but she pretended she had pointed to the right element. As he grew more agitated, she said something else in Russian. Once again, he asked what she had said, and she told him she called him an idiot. However, one thing Alia didn't know was that Q's understood Russian and that she had actually called him cute. When he was a child, he used to play with a Russian girl who lived near his grandfather's house, so he ended up learning quite a bit of the language back then. Curiously, it was the same language his wonderful Russian friend was using to flirt with him secretly. But to avoid embarrassing her and lacking the courage, Q's decided to keep it a secret. Sometime later, Q's decided to take out his phone, and the enforcer of useless matters reprimanded him, saying that phones were prohibited on school grounds unless it was an emergency. Q's replied that it was an emergency because a game was giving away a legendary character for free, but only for those who claimed it within 10 minutes. Alia confiscated his phone and saw that he had gotten Tsukuyomi, the moon goddess in Japanese mythology. The council member asked why Tsukuyomi had silver hair instead of black, but Q's didn't care about the hair color as long as the goddess remained beautiful. Hearing this, Alia felt a tinge of jealousy and returned his phone. She then said in Russian that she also had silver hair. Embarrassed, Q's asked what she said, and Alia claimed she called him an addict. Q's replied that he had to be an addict to compete because he was part of the lower ranks and had to earn his equipment through blood and sweat, unlike the rich kids who could have their parents buy them platinum armor. Fed up, Alia complained that she thought he was more serious than that, and Q's reflected internally that none of what he said was a joke. Later during lunch, Takeshi, one of Q's friends, was once again upset about not being popular with the girls. Paying little attention to his outburst, the boys at the table saw the student council members, including Alia and her sister Maria, who was the council secretary, as well as Suuyuki, the spokesperson. The boys at Q's table commented on how beautiful these girls were, although Alia supposedly already had a boyfriend according to what she had said. Q's teased that even if she didn't take, she wouldn't stand a chance, so Takeshi admitted he was jealous because the guy was close enough to that goddess to call her by her nickname. Indifferently, Q's admitted it was true, but noted that the girl was always nagging him, though Takeshi thought that was better than being ignored, especially since Alia barely spoke to anyone else. This was why he preferred Suwoo, because she was much more open and communicative than Alia. The problem was that Suwoo rejected many students. While listening to this, Kyu's glanced at the girl, who looked back at him with a red face. Soon she approached and asked to sit at the table with Alia. When the two sat down, Suwoo was much more communicative as always, while her colleague maintained her usual stern expression. During lunch, Kyu's and the council spokesperson seemed to be getting along very well, making Alia feel that familiar jealousy. She asked if the two were friends. Suwoo explained that they had known each other since childhood and had studied together from preschool until now. Then the other two boys finished eating and went to return their trays, so Suwoo moved closer to Kyu's and asked if he had considered her offer to join the student council. However, as he said so many times before, the guy has no interest in this, so the girl insists he would be a great fit with her and Alia, especially since he has experience as vice president. Alia is surprised by this information, so Suwoo explains that Kyu's was her vice when they were in elementary school. Kyu's is quick to remind everyone that he only ran because the girl pestered him a lot as she needed a vice. With that said, Suwoo argues to her colleague that this guy knows how to get things done, and she responds in Russian that she knows this very well while finishing her can of Oshiruko. On the way out of school, Suwoo says goodbye to the two, and Alia takes the opportunity to express her surprise at seeing Kyu's talking like that with the girl, as she thought he had no friends. Kyu's then points his finger at Alia, implying that she is his friend. Questioning if they indeed are, Alia concludes they are after thinking for a bit, then leaves abruptly, saying she has matters to attend to in the student council room, leaving Kyu's there. Next we see a childhood memory of Kyu's where he played with the Russian girl who lived near his grandfather. Speaking in Russian, they admired the sunset together, and the girl corrected his words or completed his sentences when he didn't know what to say. When the sun sets, the girl bids young Kyu's farewell and gives him a tender kiss on the cheek. Kyu's wakes up at this moment, remembering that he studied Russian like crazy just to talk to this girl, but nowadays he doesn't even remember her name. The next day, as was common in this school, Kyu's and Alia were responsible for organizing the classroom before the first class. As he woke up very early because of the dream, he went to school way ahead of time to get things in order, so there was nothing left to do when his task partner arrived. Alia thinks it's going to rain because she's never seen this guy care so much about organization until Kyu's notices a stain on her sock. She explains that a truck splashed water on her and that it was also her fault for walking so close to the street. But anyway, she brought another pair of socks, so it's all good. Changing the subject, Alia also asks if Kyu's really isn't interested in joining the student council since he was a vice once. Not interested, Kyu's repeats that he doesn't want to, so Alia drops the subject and removes the dirty sock, making Kyu's turn away in embarrassment. From the smile the girl gives, it seems that was her intention. The next step of her plan was to cross her legs and ask the boy to fetch her spare sock from the locker, as she had already removed the dirty one and now couldn't step on the floor. With little patience, he agrees and fetches the sock, and the girl asks him to put it on her. This time he couldn't help but question what was going on, so she explains that it's a reward for getting the sock, and then she says in Russian that it's also a reward for herself. After yet another sudden confession from the girl in another language, Kyu's begins to wonder about her intentions with this kind of thing. Maybe she's tired of acting perfect for the whole school and uses him as a release valve. Anyway, as the girl pretended to call him a coward in Russian, he holds her foot and starts putting the sock on. Even after all her bravado, Alia backs down and says she's not ready for this, but Kyu's goes through with it for being called a coward. The problem is in the middle of it, he accidentally touches a place he shouldn't, so Alia kicks him in the face, leaving the warrior defeated and left to die alone at the back of the classroom. Hours later, the boy rises from the ashes to apologize, and Alia calls him leg pervert in Russian. However, she also apologizes for kicking him and tries to touch him to see if he's okay, but the boy loses it and ends up blurting that he should be thankful for the beautiful view granted to him during the kick. Immediately, Alia punches the young man and curses his family to the 5th generation in Russian, then runs off. To try to fix this mess, Kyu's chases after the girl throughout the school, but her physical education skills keep her at a distance. Furthermore, already in the courtyard, she jumps over the side rail of the corridor, leaving the guy eating her dust. 10 minutes later, the two are panting after the marathon they ran. Regaining his breath, Kyu's apologizes apologizes again and Alia acknowledges that she was partly to blame. To make up for it, the boy gives the girl a can of oshiruko, a drink she loves. Even though she makes a fuss initially, she ends up accepting it, and after taking a sip, she offers him some in Russian. Kyu's goes crazy at the possibility of an indirect kiss happening, but not wanting to reveal that he understands the language, he plays dumb once more. Alia teases him by saying in Russian that the guy doesn't understand anything she says, causing Kyu's to lose his composure completely. The day after, Kyu's shows up to help with something Suwoo asked for, so he arrives asking what it's about. Suwoo scolds him for his lack of manners, saying the right thing to do would be to ask if she's been waiting long. He then sarcastically acts out what she requested, making Suwoo play along. Watching this with a sour expression, Alia comments that the two really do get along well, which embarrasses Kyu's. Gradually losing the joy in his eyes, Kyu's learns that he came to help organize the storage room. After some time, Suwoo asks him to fetch some board games from a higher shelf because apparently she doesn't know how to climb a ladder. Once he does, she explains that she uses these games for school festivals and also played them during the new student council meeting the other day. To make conversation, Kyu's asks who won and Suwoo responds that he's looking at the winner. Next to them, Alia asks for less chatter and more work. When Suwoo goes to do something in another corner, Alia repeatedly says in Russian that she wants attention, leaving Kyu's unsure how to react. After the storage room is organized, the students are surprised by the approach of Kanzaki, the student council president. Kanzaki comments that he's heard a lot about how talented Kyu's is, and the boy thanks him for the praise. At the same time, Kyu's observes that this guy really has a certain style, which must be why he's the school's superstar president. Whatever the case, he has nothing to do with it, so he bids farewell. But before he leaves, Kanzaki offers to pay for his dinner as a thank you for cleaning the storage room. Kyu's politely declines, but Suwoo insists because Kyu's won't have a ready dinner when he gets home. Kanzaki asks how she knows this about his life, and she reveals that they've been friends since childhood. Therefore, the president also invites the two girls. Later, after placing their orders, the four of them start a conversation. Suwoo highlights how amazing Kyu's is for handling physical work and paperwork like they're nothing, in addition to being a great master of ceremonies and negotiator. Kanzaki knows she doesn't usually speak so highly of others, so this guy must really have potential. With this in mind, the president invites Kyu's to join the student council, but for the 1000th time, the boy refuses, saying what he did in middle school was enough. Now he's tired of that kind of thing. Kanzaki agrees that the council involves a lot of work, but the reward is worth it. Being honest, he emphasizes that Kyu's participation in the council will have a huge impact on his job recommendations. Kyu's replies that he's not very ambitious, but Suwoo insists they should run together again. Kyu's argues that the girl will win the presidency with or without him, but she insists on having him by her side on this journey. Once again, he declines the invitation, this time with less patience. Kanzaki says that perhaps Suwoo isn't the best candidate considering that Alia is also running. When the Russian girl confirms this, Suwoo narrows her eyes in a challenging manner. Soon everyone's food arrives. After the meal, they all say their goodbyes, and Kanzaki says he will go with Suwoo in one direction and asks Kyu's to walk Alia home. The Russian girl refuses the company, but the boy doesn't want to leave her alone on the street at night. Along the way, he asks if she's really running for student council president, and she confirms it again without much patience. She then says she can walk the rest of the way alone and thanks him for his company. Upon reaching his doorstep, Kyu's notices women's shoes at the entrance and then sees a girl on the sofa reading a book. He asks what she's doing there. While talking about the book she's reading, she informs him that she'll be sleeping there tonight, even though the homeowner hadn't been informed. In the novel she's reading, she complains that the protagonist doesn't realize he's an older brother to one of the characters, and Kyu's finds it ironic that this girl is saying that as she pretends to everyone that she's his childhood friend. Surprised, Suwoo turns and asks if that's not true, since she and her brother have known each other forever and are close, so it makes sense. She then confirms that the older guy with the character is her brother. Kyu's considers that maybe they're half-siblings or something like that, so Suwoo grabs him by the collar and responds that the story is only good because they're blood siblings. The next day, Suwoo wakes her brother up by annoying him, so he threatens to report her for domestic violence. With no other options, the girl promises to hide under his bed to pull his feet. Fed up, Kyu's tells his sister to get down, and she asks if it's because he'll end up with a tent pitched if she doesn't leave. Later, they watch a movie together called Space Girl girl Chiai and Siwoo gets emotional seeing exclusive relationship scenes that never appeared on TV. Because of this, she wants to watch the movie again right then, but Q's brings her back to reality, reminding her they need to do some shopping. In a clothing store, Siwoo would love to buy a summer dress, but prefers to declare bankruptcy buying anime items. Hughes finds it absurd that the fabric costs 15,000 yen, and the girl explains that women's fashion charges by the centimeter of fabric. Changing the subject, her brother comments that maybe a silver thing is spying on them, while Alia watches their interaction with a hateful expression. Siwoo says she noticed it long before, ever since they arrived on that floor, because she has a sixth sense for detecting the gazes of people she knows. Hughes asks if she isn't ashamed to say something so ridiculous with such confidence, and she admits that she is, but without breaking character. Hughes then wonders how he can resolve this until he looks back and sees his sister heading directly toward Alia. With no place to hide, the Russian girl pretends she stumbled upon them by chance at the mall, and they both pretend to believe her. She explains that she came to buy some clothes, so Siwoo invites her to join them for lunch. Hughes is worried about taking her to that restaurant, and his sister remarks that he was eager for this to happen, surprising Alia. The Russian girl asks what's wrong with the restaurant, so Siwoo asks if she likes spicy food, because that's the house specialty. Hughes is more honest with his friend and warns her that the food there burns hotter than hell in summer without a fan, but Alia decides to go without hesitation. Upon arrival, and not for lack of warning, the restaurant's name is Hell's Cauldron, causing Alia's eyes to widen. Siwoo dismisses it as just a little spice, making the Russian girl frown, and Hughes tries one last time to warn her that all hope should be abandoned if she decides to open the gates of hell. Regardless, Alia stands firm and doesn't back down. Once seated, she can't understand anything on the menu, so Siwoo explains that Blood Pool Hell is a ramen with a very red soup, the least spicy on the menu. Thorny Valley Hell makes it feel like your tongue is being dipped in acid. Alia asks about Infinite Hell, and Siwoo says she'd rather sleep in a dragon's stomach. Hughes opts for the mildest dish because he doesn't want to experiment in an unfamiliar restaurant, and the two women follow suit. After placing their order, Alia comments on Siwoo's masculine outfit, and she explains that she's taking advantage of her day off to break her routine. To make things even more awkward, Siwoo mentions that she was in bed with Hughes this morning, causing him to spit out his water and attract stares from the restaurant. His sister adds that she felt like wearing something different today, so she borrowed a shirt from him. On the verge of passing out, Alia asks Hughes what that's all about, and he explains that this girl showed up at his house unannounced, entered his room, and jumped on his bed. To cool things down, the waiter brings a volcano in the form of food to the table, and Alia threatens to cancel, but swallows her fear and a bit of that noodle. Her soul is instantly cremated, but she pretends everything is fine when Hughes asks. With that, the siblings enjoy the food and praise its quality until Alia starts tearing up and asking someone to kill her in Russian. Hughes tells her she doesn't need to push herself, but she lies, saying it's great. Noticing the conversation, Siwoo takes the opportunity to offer Demon's Tear to spice up her dish further. Hughes sees the malicious glint in his sister's eyes and realizes she's doing it on purpose, so he asks Alia not to add that spice, but she thinks a single drop won't make a difference. As soon as she tries the food with the extra heat, she wakes up in a park, not knowing how she got there. Hughes informs her that Siwoo went to buy something and offers her an ice cream to soothe her. In the midst of this, he asks why she wants to be president, and she responds that she doesn't need a reason to aim for something big. She just wants it even though she doesn't have a running mate. Hughes explains that she can only run with a vice president, so Alia decides to find someone to be her vice just on paper. In Russian, she confides that she wishes Hughes would stand by her in this process, which touches him. This statement makes him recall an old moment when a girl was crying and apologizing to her parents behind a stage curtain. Distracted, the boy is invited to accompany Alia to a clothing store, but he thinks it requires more intimacy to advise a woman on what to wear. Internally, he reflects that Alia doesn't quite understand how friendships work, and understanding her perspective, he agrees to accompany her, making it clear that they are friends. At the store, Alia wonders why Hughes suddenly started being nice to her and concludes that he feels sorry for her, thinking she has no chance of being elected president. Convinced of this, she angrily says she'll change and promises to show show who's boss with her fashion show. Worried about the chance of him hearing her change, she tells him to leave, which he does. Feeling more secure, she puts on the dress she picked out and likes the result. Before leaving the changing room, she's afraid he won't react, but pushes that aside and shows off her outfit. People around praise the girl's beauty, and Q's comments that the dress highlights Alia's elegance and femininity, making her even more beautiful than she already is. Disbelieving what she just heard, she closes the curtain and freaks out over being praised more than she expected, while Q's is also unsure of what he said outside. Noticing the boy's talent for compliments, the Russian girl thinks he must have practiced with Siwoo, so she puts on a more masculine outfit to compete with her. Once again, Q's praises her with his excellent rhetoric, leaving her even more flustered. Addicted to receiving compliments, she tries on the entire store for her friend to see. For the grand finale, she puts on the most daring outfit she's worn so far, but when she opens the curtain, Siwoo is next to Q's, so she closes the curtain and says something in Russian. Siwoo asks what she said, and Q's explains that she seems to want to die, so his sister mocks the Russian girl. Taking the subway home, the siblings say goodbye, leaving Alia alone with her embarrassed thoughts. Putting that aside, she wonders why the two got off at the same station. When she gets home, the Russian girl is greeted warmly by her older sister Masha. Alia reveals that she met Q's and his childhood friend, prompting Masha to comment that her sister always gets irritated when it comes to that boy. She understands that Alia has finally found someone who truly moved her heart. Alia doesn't like this comment and downplays it, arguing that she doesn't see the boy that way. Many years ago in Vladivostok, Russia, the teacher asks the students to form groups and write about local shops, with the best group winning a prize. Excited, the children begin forming teams, and Alia's classmates decide to write about the clothing store and the bakery, leaving her to handle the butcher shop and the florist. Being competitive, Alia wants to come in first. When she arrives at the florist, she tells the owner that she is doing a school project and needs to study his shop. Later, she stops by the butcher shop and does the same. The next day, when presenting what she did to her friends, none of them had done anything, so Alia scolds the boys, saying that such a report is lengthy. However, since they have a week's deadline, her classmates believe they have plenty of time. Frustrated, Alia insists it won't be enough time. The boys take her notebook and see that she is taking the project very seriously. The other girl in the group anxiously asks if they have to read all of it, which makes Alia even angrier. The whole group starts arguing over this, and the teacher has to intervene. Staying late at school, Alia refuses to give in and continues to focus on her work, further developing her notes. A week later, when the results are announced, Group B emerges victorious, leaving Alia devastated despite all her effort. Returning home that day, she reflects that she would have won if only her group members had been as serious as she was. At the same time, she concludes that she shouldn't expect much from others, since she feels no one is as motivated as she is. With teary eyes, she decides that if that's the case, she'll do everything on her own. Years later in Japan, her new classmates ask if she passed that super difficult transfer exam, and she proudly says yes. The students ask how she speaks Japanese so well, and she explains that she lived in the country 5 years ago. When the bell rings and class begins, Alia looks over and sees a boy who slept through all the noise, so she wakes him to let him know the bell rang. Lazily, Q's asks if she is the girl who gave the speech at the opening ceremony, so she formally introduces herself enthusiastically. Q's also says his name, but without much grace. Stretching, he's happy to see that Hikaru is in the same class as him, and even happier to find that Takeshi is there too. In science class, Q's forgets his notebook at home and shares with a friend. During physical education, he runs as if he's carrying lead weights in his underwear. In math class, the only counting he does is of sheep while he dreams. Seeing all this, Alia realizes that even the most prestigious schools have their share of lazy students. Later, with 14 days until the school festival, it was decided that the theme would be Haunted House. Hikaru and Takeshi rack their brains trying to figure out how to get costumes for the ghosts, while Alia sews some in her corner. After the last bell rings, some classmates tell her it's time to go home, but the Russian girl wants to stay late, dedicating herself to the task. After they leave, Alia overhears the girls commenting that it's just a festival and shouldn't be taken so seriously. This makes her feel like the present is repeating the past from the days when she would get indignant in the cloudy streets of Russia. Lost in her memories, she pricks her finger and watches the blood ooze out. Nevertheless, she doesn't intend to give up, even if it means being alone. Suddenly, Suddenly Q's arrives in the room looking for her and asks her to go home because he got a document showing that the Handicrafts Club offered to help with the festival costumes after he had the former student council president pull some strings. Therefore, Alia no longer needs to work on them as everything is already arranged, and there's no need for her to do it all alone. Annoyed, she responds that she just wants the festival to be good. As she speaks, she starts to cry and get more agitated, claiming that people don't pay as much attention to these things as she does. Finally, she asks if she's doing something wrong, to which Q's replies that she's putting effort into the wrong things because school activities aren't meant to be done alone, but rather to foster a sense of teamwork among students to create something together. Not knowing what to say, Alia packs up her things and leaves. Hurrying through the corridors, she wonders what that boy has in his head. The next day, Takeshi presents his pre-festival project, an event just for them that will include a hide-and-seek game and a courage test in the school premises. With 6 days left until the event, everyone works together to build every detail, and Alia gets excited when she receives her well-made ghost costume, even starting to socialize with her classmates more casually. Soon, the big day of the Serei Autumn Festival arrives, and all the participants take their positions to give their best after so much effort in setting everything up. After the event, their class wins the prize for the best attraction at the festival, and at night, the students gather for the post-festival folk dance. Alia sees Q's and asks to sit next to him, so he assumes she doesn't know how to dance since she decided to sit there instead of participating, considering any boy would love to dance with her. With a serious expression, she mentions that she practiced ballet as a child, so this easy dance wouldn't be a problem for her. However, she refused to dance with all the guys because she didn't want to bother. Q's comments that it must be tough to reject so many people, but she notes that she's used to it. That's when the boy understands why they call Alia the Ice Princess. The girl is bothered by the nickname, but only the princess part, as it makes her seem like one of those snobby privileged kids. Of course, she was born with above average looks and talent according to herself, but she couldn't survive on just that. Looking at the bandages on her fingers, she confesses that it irritates her when her effort is ignored, and people only value other things. Given this, Q's proposes asking everyone not to call her that anymore, and the girl thanks him. In the end, she acknowledges that she would never have experienced the school festival this way if she had done everything alone, and, taking advantage of the moment, apologizes for getting mad at Q's that day. Q's didn't see it as a big deal, especially since Alia put in much more effort than he did, for example, but the girl insists on making it up to him somehow. So, he asks if there's a Russian custom where people give each other special nicknames. Until then, he had only called the Russian girl by her last name, Kujo. When she responded that her family calls her Alia, he asks to call her that as a reward. Alia asks what he gains from that, and he claims he'll be the only one to call the prettiest girl in school by her nickname. Speaking of which, a few boys appear to invite the Ice Princess to the dance, leaving her embarrassed with so many people insisting. Seeing his new friend in trouble, Q's pulls Alia away and tells the others that this girl is already taken. As Q's pulls her toward the dance, the girl feels her heart about to explode, and since she said a simple dance like this would be easy, the boy asks her to show if she was serious. The next day, as usual, Alia looks at her friend sleeping in class with a disdainful expression. When he wakes up, she tells him he's a waste of space. In Russian, she says that just because he was nice to her last night doesn't mean things will change. After Alia tells the whole story, Masha is happy with a love story between the two, which irritates the older sister because one thing has nothing to do with the other. To the older sister, it's clearly a love story like in the movies, where a friendship grows into a romance. Looking at the pendant she got from Sa, her boyfriend, Masha claims it was the same for her, especially when the boy saved her from a dog attack. Nervous, Alia tells the girl to brag about her love life elsewhere. The next day, in the student council room, Q's is greeted by the council president, Kanzaki, as he was called to help Yuki. At that moment, a girl introduces herself as Maria Kujo, Alia's older sister and student council secretary. However, she prefers to be called Masha because a friend of her sister is also a friend of hers. Saying this, she holds the boy's hand and says it's a pleasure to meet him. In that gesture, she feels something different in her heart and asks Q's given name. He responds that it's Masachika, which means together with diplomacy. The girl snaps out of it and apologizes for her behavior, then invites the boy to join her. but in Russian. Although he understood, he keeps pretending not to. So Masha repeats the request in Japanese. Later, in a gift shop, Masha falls in love with a plush cat that looks like Alia. According to her, Hughes looks disgusted, but the girl believes it's a great idea to buy plushies that resemble each student council member. Hughes agrees that the girls will love it, but wonders how the president would look among those toys. Ignoring his opinion, Masha begins her search for a plushie that looks like Kanzaki. Hughes tries to stop her, but gives in when she shows him a lion with glasses that looks exactly like the president. Despite this, he insists it's not a good idea to buy those things. So Masha gives up, but decides to take the first kitten she saw anyway. Worried, Hughes asks her not to put that toy on the same receipt or her sister, the treasurer, will get annoyed. Leaving the store, the boy notices Alia's sister's oddity and wonders if she's always like that. If so, it explains why Alia also seems a bit off. Sometime later, Masha arrives at the tea shop and gives her sister in plush form to the boy, who doesn't know how to react. According to her, the two look great together, so much so that she decides to take a picture of this unique moment. But Hughes stops her by placing a bag in front of the camera. Inside the tea shop, Masha asks Hughes' opinion on a product, but he warns he knows nothing about it. Internally, he reflects that his sister, Yuki, could help a lot with this since their mother taught her a lot about it. Remembering their childhood, when their parents separated, Hughes decided to live with his father. But Yuki, who was ill, stayed with their mother. Seeing the boy was distressed, Masha gives him a caring hug, making Hughes feel something different inside, until the tea she was holding burns the boy's back. In shock, Masha drops the cup while the Alia plushie seems to observe the scene. Later, upon arriving at the student council room, Masha shows the new mascot to the president. Kanzaki admits that the creature is cute but hopes the girl doesn't plan to keep it there. Hughes places the supplies they bought on the table and Kanzaki thanks him as he couldn't imagine what it would be like if the older Kujo had gone shopping alone. Inside, Hughes knows well that the council would turn into a theme park created by a 6-year-old. Speaking of which, the president pats Hughes on the shoulder and asks if he's changed his mind about joining the council, but he remains firm in his decision, although he doesn't mind lending a hand occasionally. Masha suggests he join in name only and Hughes understands the girl wants him to join, but he doesn't get why the president is so determined to convince him. Kanzaki turns the question around, wanting to know why Hughes is so determined not to participate. In fact, Kanzaki believes there's a reason behind this beyond the workload involved. Hughes explains that he doesn't feel worthy of being a student council representative, but the president disagrees, reminding him that he was an excellent vice president in middle school. Still, it was precisely this experience that proved to Hughes that he isn't suited for such a position, as he felt he had no relevant goal to achieve in that role. In response, Kanzaki confesses that he became president just to win the heart of the girl he liked, a much more trivial reason than any other. Remembering this, the young man can't help but burst into laughter while Hughes asks if he's serious. To prove his point, Kanzaki shows a photo of a beaten and unconfident boy, which Hughes thinks is the younger brother of the young man. However, it was Kanzaki himself in the last year of middle school just 2 years ago. His grades were bad, and he hated sports, even more so school in general, until one day he fell in love with one of the prettiest girls in the class, who is now his current girlfriend, Sarashina Chisaki, the vice president. That's why he doesn't believe Hughes needs a proper reason, especially since Masha only joined because Chisaki asked her to. Masha believes it doesn't matter why you join the council, but what you do during your time there. It doesn't matter if it was for love or friendship, as long as you care about making things better for other students. Otherwise, only saints could hold positions of power. That said, Kanzaki reminds Hughes that he has already shown results as vice president once in his life, and that alone is proof that he has nothing to be ashamed of. This comment brings Hughes back to the memory of the election he participated in when he was younger. His sister asked him to stay by her side no matter what, but he thought it would be too much trouble. Anyway, Kanzaki states that Hughes could join the council to elect someone else as president, as this is perfectly acceptable and everyone will welcome him with open arms. Faced with this, Hughes says he'll think about it, and Kanzaki notes that having time to think is the great privilege of youth. Masha reminds them that the president is not an old man, even though he seems older than he really is, and Kanzaki admits he's heard that many times. Recently, he was mistaken for a graduate student. Reflecting briefly Briefly on the proposal, Kyu's asks where Alia is and Kanzaki explains that she's mediating a discussion between the baseball and soccer teams, as the baseball team has inter-school games every year around this time and uses the field to prepare, but the soccer team made it to the regional qualifiers this year and also needs the field. Neither team wants to give in, especially since the baseball team is visited by scouts who recruit players to go pro, and the team captain has even been featured on TV and is seen as a big promise in the sport. Usually Chisaki mediates between the clubs, but she's busy with important matters in the kendo club. That's why Kanzaki sent Alia to gain experience, although it seems she's having trouble. Hearing this, Kyu's excuses himself and leaves the council room to see if there's any trouble between the teams. Meanwhile, in the locker room, Alia is sweating bullets in the midst of a bunch of men with fire in their eyes. Trying to control everyone's anger, she emphasizes that belittling others won't solve the situation. The soccer goalie asks if she has a better idea, so she suggests they use the nearby Riverside Park to train, as it has both baseball and soccer fields. However, the school's field is in much better condition, so no one wants to give it up. This fact reignites the argument, and Alia tries to be heard once more, but is drowned out by the boys shouting. Faced with this, she feels like a failure who can't influence people. This reminds her of when she was younger, when she decided she wouldn't trust people anymore, only to regret it later. That day she resolved to do everything alone because no one could keep up with her pace. Now she pays the price for having isolated herself and scorned interaction with others. Absolutely no one pays attention to her for this reason, as Alia has always been seen as someone who dictated right and wrong with her nose in the air, as if she were the owner of the truth. Thinking about it, Alia concludes that she is completely alone, and this feeling brings tears to her eyes, especially since she is sure it's her own fault. In Russian, she quietly asks for help, as if someone could somehow hear her. Suddenly, Kyu's awkwardly enters the locker room and apologizes for interrupting, then announces that he is responsible for general matters of the student council and has been sent as reinforcement for the mediation. Moments earlier, Kyu's had been listening to the argument and how Alia was trying to calm everyone down, and he realized that her approach wouldn't work because both sides were too heated, so it would be good for the council to buy some time to start over. Despite this, Kyu's believes it's a good experience for the girl and turns to leave until he hears her asking for help in Russian. Before entering the locker room, he thinks that this is why Alia is always alone, because she only says important things in a language no one understands. When the boy gets into trouble, one of the baseball players recognizes him as the one who was vice president during elementary school. Kyu's arrives with a bang and emphasizes that the big question is who gets the school field and who goes to the river. He suggests that the baseball team take the river as they have fewer players to move. In exchange, the soccer team, which has more people, will send some to help with the process. Still, the soccer players don't want to cooperate, and the baseball team won't budge either. So the soccer assistants offer to help with the relocation, calming everyone's nerves. With the terms agreed upon between both parties, the matter is officially resolved. Therefore, Kyu's asks the captain from each side to attend the student council with their formal requests. Later, when returning to the council, Kyu's apologizes to Alia for thinking he might have run over her in the middle of the discussion. She didn't see anything wrong, but wanted to know why the boy made that proposal, because it seemed like he knew the assistant would offer help. Moreover, Kyu's was staring at the assistant the whole time during the discussion. He explains that the girl is dating the captain of the baseball team, and as the team leader, he had to stick to his convictions even if he wanted to help his girlfriend. What Kyu's did was give the girl a little nudge by looking directly at her and instigating a decision from her, considering that as the baseball captain's girlfriend, she wouldn't feel out of place helping. On their way, Kanzaki approaches the two and asks if the case was settled. Upon confirmation, the president thanks the youngest Kujo for her help, making Kyu's imagine that it was all planned to make him intervene in the mediation on purpose. Having no reason to lie, Kanzaki admits that was the plan and asks if Kyu's has made up his mind. Finally, the boy changes his mind and makes himself available. Happy, Kanzaki calls the new member to the council room. At night on the way home, Kyu's confesses that he doesn't like the feeling of being tricked, but believes it's time to to accept his fate because all his actions pushed him toward the student council. Speaking of which, since it was late, Kanzaki left the form for the boy to fill out and deliver tomorrow. Alia asks if Q's will join the presidential election with Siwoo because even if it's true, she won't give up on becoming president, even if it means facing both of them. Remembering how the Russian girl is, Q's knows well that she won't give up because she sees Alia as an unwavering force. Given this, he states that he will make her president because he doesn't want Alia to be alone anymore. Therefore, from now on they are on the same side. Saying this, he extends his hand and Alia wipes her tears and reciprocates the gesture. Then she surprises Q's with a phrase in Russian that makes his heart race. When he was a child playing with his Russian friend, he felt the same thing, and now he discovers he can feel it again. Suddenly, Alia crushes his hand's bones and asks if he was thinking about another girl. Q's confesses in shock and soon realizes he committed the second biggest mistake a romantic comedy protagonist could make in a confession. The first is to repeat the same confession. Alia assumes the boy was thinking about Yuki Siwoo, but before he can deny it, he gets another tight squeeze on his hand. Finally, she slaps his face in exchange for forgiving him for the mistake. Q's falls to the ground and praises the girl's strength. Then she extends her hand to help him up. Near home, he confesses that it's the first time he's been slapped by a girl and believes it gave him XP as a man. In response, Alia comments that the boy must have hit his head on the ground in the fall unless he has a defective brain from the factory, and Q's finds it ironic to hear that considering he was considered a child prodigy. Disbelieving, Alia gives an ironic laugh. At the building's door, the Russian girl asks if the guy wants ice to put on his face, but he says he's fine since he doesn't feel anything on the left side of his face. Then Alia kisses the right side and says goodbye. When she goes up to her room, Alia panics, remembering that she said she loves Q's in Russian, so she starts denying to herself that she indeed feels that way about him, pretending she just got carried away by the heat of the moment. Even if she's in love, hypothetically speaking, her priority is to be elected president of the student council, and that's what she should focus on right now, nothing else.
However, Alia can't stop imagining tomorrow when she returns to school and Q's says he didn't mean it when he said they were on the same side.
At that moment, her older sister arrives and says she met a wonderful person. Then she shows a stuffed kitten and says it looks like her sister, although Alia doesn't think so. Later, Masha comments that Q's is a great guy and understands why her sister fell in love with him. Although Alia denies it, her sister warns that she needs to confess her feelings to him as soon as possible because any day she might end up losing the one she loves to someone else. At the same time, Q's Masachika was having that internal debate everyone has when they think they've said something stupid or cheesy in front of someone they want to impress. At least he was sure Alia had said she loved him, which might mean the things she said in Russian weren't just jokes. She even seemed very serious when she said it today, but still Q's couldn't believe that girl could love him. With his low self-esteem, the student preferred to think that Alia got carried away by the moment and acted on impulse. In his mind, Alia was probably screaming into her pillow out of embarrassment and regret. After all, having grown up watching his parents fight, Q's saw love as a fragile and unreliable feeling, sometimes even a waste of time. Despite saying he would stay by Alia's side, the boy still felt guilty for having once run away from his sister, leaving her to carry the Siwoo family name alone. When he got home, he saw Yuki's shoes at the entrance, even though she had said she would be out. The first thing he did was go to the bathroom where the girl had left the door open and was caught undressed. Although Yuki screamed and called her brother a pervert, he found it more likely that she had planned this because being naked with the door unlocked is not a smart way to preserve one's privacy. To make matters worse, Yuki confessed she did it on purpose because they had never had this scene together before where the brother walks in on the sister while she is dressing, and she said every pair of siblings should go through this at least once in their lives. Q's responded that this only made sense in her crazy otaku brain, but Yuki was determined to carry out her scene to the end, even looking at an imaginary camera to take that fan service photo. Q's questioned what she was doing, and she said she was looking at a camera that only idiots couldn't see, so he grumbled again. Ignoring him, Yuki said this was her reward for fooling her brother earlier, but Q's warned he didn't want to be rewarded by seeing her as she came into the world. Yuki insisted that her brother had taken a secret peek, so Q's taught that looking at everything at once wasn't fun, but that the true master should sneak a glance. After the initial initial shock of hearing such an atrocity, Yuki regained her composure and agreed that was the trick, but she made sure to know if he had taken a look. Cornered, Q's admitted he had observed the heart region starting the second round of their fight. Later in Q's room, Yuki asked if her brother had finally decided to join the council, and he admitted he had, but that he would support Alia for president. This statement distressed Yuki, making her feel she was losing her brother to the Russian girl, and she couldn't understand why she couldn't keep her brother entertained with her own assets, or maybe the Russian girl had some special charm she didn't know about. Tired, Q's asked his sister to be a bit less graphic in her description, but she wouldn't stop teasing him. First, she questioned if he wanted to be the first to honk his sister's horn, but remembered that had already happened in elementary school. Remembering this, Yuki lost all humor and assumed a tense expression, recalling a day they collided during a game of tag and Q's accidentally touched something he shouldn't have. Q's marveled that he hadn't knocked the wind out of his sister in the collision, considering she had asthma, and the girl certainly agreed, although today she felt healthy enough not to catch even a cold. Q's remembered his sister was quieter back then, causing Yuki to completely freak out, telling him to pamper her instead of judging what she did or didn't do when she was younger. She handed him her hairbrush, and he brushed Yuki's hair without complaining while apologizing for deciding to support Alia for student council president. However, Yuki didn't mind and actually liked thinking she would experience a classic sibling rivalry just like in books and movies. Still feeling guilty, the boy told her he hadn't stopped liking her because of that, and Yuki had no doubts about it. In any case, they were now rivals, but Yuki made it clear she was willing to forgive the betrayal and was available to receive her brother's support if he changed his mind about Alia. Q's felt uncomfortable seeing his sister refer to it as a betrayal, but assured her he wouldn't abandon his Russian friend. On the other hand, Yuki was sure the guy would change his mind at some point. With that, she said goodbye to her brother, and outside his room lamented not being the one to motivate him, but showed that she didn't care as much as she pretended in front of him. However, she didn't like losing. When morning came, Q's woke up with a doubt, wondering if he had hurt his sister in yesterday's conversation. Considering that Yuki was emotionally unstable, the boy intended to make it up to his sister for not supporting her for student council president. However, she seemed fine pulling a prank on him despite getting stuck under the bed while doing so. But instead of pulling her out, Q's decided to smother her and end her life once and for all. Later, Alia is deep in thought, showing some anticipation for the arrival of the boy she likes. When a man enters the room, she gets startled, thinking it was Q's. She tries to stay calm and act normal, and even gets another scare when the guy actually arrives, but quickly pretends to be unbothered to hide her feelings. Despite her efforts, it's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the glow she sees around him. When Q sits at the table and chats with his friends, displaying a very different mood than usual, the Russian girl wonders why he didn't arrive, yawning like always. Somehow she feels he's adjusting his behavior to be around her, just as he said he would yesterday. In the meantime, as she was idle in the middle of a volleyball game, a teammate calls Alia's attention to the ball coming her way. Alia jumps up to spike it, scoring the winning point. Later in the boys' game, Q's isn't so lucky, getting hit in the back of the head by a ball during his team's serve. Nursing a bump on his head, the poor guy tries to recover while his stomach growls with hunger. Alia approaches to check on him, and he assures her it's nothing serious. For some reason, Alia places her hand on her own forehead and then on Q's, giving him a prime view of the mountainous regions of the landscape. In that moment, he recalls his sister's strange talk about this and swallows hard with bitterness. Then Alia ties her hair up, revealing the edge of her armpit, driving the student even crazier. Just as he told his sister, the true master peaks only briefly. Alia asks why he's acting this way, and he pretends it's nothing. Soon she stands up and suggests he drinks some water, which he does, accompanied by Alia. Just like the Russian girl, the Japanese boy is finding it hard to stop staring at his friend, trying his best to hide his real feelings by almost diving into the water. Amidst all this, Masha arrives to chat with a guy who's now staring at the clouds. On the outside, he talks about the blue sky and everything around it, but inside, all he can think about is how much he's come to like gym uniforms after today. Masha asks if he has a towel to dry off from the water fountain, but the guy is old school and prefers to let the sun do the job. Without wanting to know, Masha pulls Q's head down and starts rubbing it with her towel, ensuring a privileged view of the brighter side of life. He thanks her and says he now knows how a dog feels after a bath, to which Masha responds that she's always had a special fondness for dogs. Jealous Alia pulls her friend back to the classroom and asks Masha to do the same. On the way back to the classroom, Q's was already wondering where this was going and closes his eyes when Alia speaks to him, expecting a scolding. However, the Russian girl was asking if he was feeling better. Showing the same kindness as yesterday, Alia seemed to be entering her affectionate mode according to Q's. Curious about this, he asks if Alia isn't being too nice, and she replies that she's worried because he's been acting strange all day. Q's was about to say he's fine, but his stomach growls loudly again, making Alia think he didn't sleep in class only because he was too hungry. Q's explains that it was actually because he had a good night's sleep, which makes the Russian girl furious because she could hardly sleep last night thinking about what he said while he slept like a log. Annoyed, she walks away and Q's recognizes his friend because that's the Alia he knows. At the end of the day, he asks Alia to stop by the student council room, but she's too angry to respond. Still, she follows the path he wanted, so he silently follows behind. In one of the hallways, the soccer and baseball players were acting like army recruits in front of the council room. Not understanding anything, Q's opens the door and comes face to face with Sarashina Chisaki, who was carrying a bamboo katana on her shoulder. He was about to close the door after claiming he knocked on the wrong room, but the girl stops him. She then returns to her normal behavior and explains that she was just angry because she thought it was the soccer and baseball guys coming back. Sarashina is furious because she sent a junior student to mediate the conflict between the teams, but from what she heard, they all ignored her and kept fighting like a bunch of fools. For this reason, the senior student literally used the bamboo on some of them. Q's thinks it's excessive to carry a sword, but the girl is sure that a bamboo strike won't kill anyone. As soon as she says this, she starts laughing and Q's forces a laugh to not make the situation worse, but he knows Sarashina well and that some boys even call her Big Sis because of this behavior. Kanzaki intervenes to ease the tension, explaining that his girlfriend didn't hurt anyone, but just threatened them if they didn't agree to behave civilly. Irritated by being exposed, Sarashina slaps the boy who thought his shoulder would get dislocated. At this moment, Masha arrives at the meeting and asks the couple not to fool around in the council room. Embarrassed, Sarashina apologizes to her boyfriend, but he responds that it was good to take those slaps because they relieved some of the pain he was feeling. Still feeling guilty, the girl claims she can't control her strength, so Kanzaki promises to prepare to become a punching bag if that's what it takes to be by his beloved's side. With that said, Sarashina pulls the man closer to her, making Q's wonder how on earth this turned into a romantic scene. Alia joins in the fun, and they both laugh at what's happening. Then Masha comes closer and comments that the two really get along, making Alia blush. Now it's Yuki's turn to arrive late. With that, the student council meeting finally begins. First of all, the president asks the newest member to introduce himself, so he says his name and mentions that he will be running for the presidential election alongside Alia Kujo. Beyond his name, he claims to be a big consumer of otaku media and is willing to talk about it if anyone wants to get to know him better. That said, the president announces that the young man is officially part of the council members. As his first task, the newbie is assigned to help the older Kujo sister Masha. Finally, Kanzaki assures that Q's will quickly adapt to the new job thanks to his experience as vice president, but in any case, it would be interesting to get back on track working with the girls. By the way, there are not enough people to meet all the council's service demands, so it's a good time for the newbie to show what he's made of. Yuki interrupts to say she's going to the art club to discuss their next exhibition, and since one of the topics will surely be the project budget, she'd like to take Alia, who is the organization's treasurer. Alia accepts the proposal and the president gives the green light. Soon the two set off alone for work, and Q's is sure some trouble is going to happen. No wonder Alia feels the same way, and while heading to the job, she can't resist and calls Yuki for a chat. Yuki agrees, but asks that it be in an empty classroom nearby. Inside, the Russian girl once again states her intention to run for president alongside Q's. Not as an apology or anything, since she doesn't think she's doing anything wrong, but she still believes she should say it personally to Yuki. Yuki agrees there's no reason to apologize, especially since Q's himself chose this path. Whether true or not, the boy's sister says she has nothing to say about it, much less wants to vent any frustration on her colleague, but she confesses she felt bad for not being the one he chose for the election. But Yuki goes further by saying she she loves the boy, which leaves the Russian girl stunned. To make matters worse, she emphasizes that she loves him more than her own parents and provokes her colleague, asking if she loves him too. Alia is more economical with words, responding that Q's is just a friend, but Yuki presses to know if the girl is in love with her brother. Without holding back, she pushes Alia until she gets what she wants. Literally pushing the girl against the wall, Yuki manages to hear from Alia that she doesn't know if she's in love or not. After a brief pause to gather courage, the Russian girl confesses that she won't let Yuki have him, so the sister closes her eyes with some disdain and is happy to have gotten that response today. With that said, she calls her council colleague to accompany her to the art club, and taking advantage of being alone since she heard Q's and Masha calling the Russian girl by her nickname, Yuki decides to do the same, and in return she also asks to be called by her first name. With that, whether they liked it or not, Yuki Suo and Alisa Kujo had a deal. Meanwhile, Masha and Q's work together, and the boy notices that the girl knows exactly what she's doing when it comes to showing results. On the other hand, the president's girlfriend is an absolute disaster, clumsy to the extreme. Kanzaki sees that things are not looking good and tells Chisaki that there's a big restocking going on in the library and they need help to finish it, so he sends her there. Eager to show her worth, she rushes towards her destination while Kanzaki shows his impatience with his beloved's blunders. Once she's gone, he feels obliged to explain why his girlfriend is like that. According to him, Chisaki has always been this clumsy, but even so, she is a force to be reckoned with in club and committee discussions, according to the president. To avoid embarrassment, Q's comments that the council member has her strengths and weaknesses certainly. With the president's departure, Masha suggests they take a break for tea, and the girl had everything needed to make a great drink like milk, sugar, and even strawberry jam. Q's remembers that this jam is also used in Russian tea, so he wants a cup. Anyway, he thought black tea was more common for Russians in winter, but the girl explains that it depends a lot on the family. Hers, for example, like to drink it all year round, rain or shine, because they got the habit from their mother, who is fascinated by this type of drink. Q's asked because he has a fondness for Russia, even though he doesn't know much about the country. According to him, when he was a kid, he watched some movies from there with his grandfather, which sparked his interest. Besides that, the boy has a lot more to do with Russia, but he doesn't want to talk much about that part. Actually, he studied like crazy to learn as much of the language as possible to be able to speak with the girl he loved in his childhood. Anyway, the Russian tea is on the table and Q's falls in love with the flavor. Looking closely at his cup, he ends up remembering that his mother was also a big fan of the drink while watching Masha eat the jam separately from the tea. Curious, he asks why, and she says it's just a personal preference. Following her lead, the boy takes a spoonful of strawberry jam but finds it too sweet. At that moment, Alia and Yuki arrive after finishing their task. Masha offers tea, which Yuki accepts immediately. Alia, on the other hand, is in a much less enthusiastic mood, so to speak, because she went through a tough time at the hands of her best friend's sister. Seeing that the Russian girl sat too close to him for no reason, Q's asks what happened, and she explains that in her country, sitting too much at the corner of the table is considered bad luck. Not that she had much luck today, at least so far. Anyway, the girl sits so close that she pushes Q's to the other side, while Yuki gives a jealous, crazy look at her council colleague. The Russian girl, of course, doesn't hold back, so Q's realizes he's in the middle of a battle. To ease the tension, he asks Masha if it's true about sitting at the corner of the table, and she confirms, adding that single people who sit at the corner will never marry according to local culture. The older sister asks if the younger one has found someone to marry. Alia then pretends that she just didn't want to sit on the edge. Switching to her native language, she lets slip that it's too early to think about marriage. Q silently agrees since they are only 15 years old. Soon Masha serves her sister with a plate filled with jelly before the tea. Later, Kanzaki announces that the work for the day is done, and since the second-year students still need to discuss something with the teachers, the freshmen can go home. Walking home alongside Alia, Q senses his sister did something wrong as the Russian girl seems irritated. Passing by Royal fast, he invites his friend inside to talk about her candidacy for president. Despite agreeing readily, she mutters in Russian, upset that this isn't a date. Clutching his chest, the Japanese boy is surprised to learn that's what his friend wanted. Inside the diner, Q's asks why she looks so annoyed. She claims to be just tired, but soon asks if he's dating Yuki. Q's seriously responds that he's not and takes the opportunity to advise Alia. In truth, Yuki is just having fun with the Russian to see her reactions. Putting that aside, he brings up the candidacy issue, making it clear that at this rate, they won't be able to beat Yuki, who is very popular. Remembering when he ran against his sister years ago in another school, there were 6 competing tickets unlike the 3 in his current school. In that election, out of the 12 people who entered, half dropped out of the Children's Congress a bit before the election. The Congress is a kind of debate contest held by the students, like if the school's baseball and soccer teams couldn't agree and had to debate in the Congress to decide. When this Congress presents presidential candidates, it becomes a preview of the election, and once they debate their policies and one side wins, the winner usually becomes the favorite for the student council race. Anyway, this race gets filtered down until only a few candidates for the student council presidency remain, but when Yuki began to stand out, everyone dropped out of the race against her. While Q's was explaining all this, Alia was biting her straw in anger and tension, and only realized it much later. Since she seemed more focused on her homeland than this conversation, he asked if she was listening, and Alia pretended she was just fascinated by the ice cream and got distracted. In reality, she was furious about how her friend was acting, giving so much credit to the brash Yuki and practically declaring her the president in advance. Not wanting to look bad, Alia insisted on the ice cream business and offered some to her council colleague. He preferred to get a new spoon, but Alia didn't want to bother another waiter with such a trifle. Practically shoving the spoon into the boy's mouth, she insisted that this was very common in Russia. As soon as Q's tasted the sweet from the spoon that had been in Alia's mouth, he knew this was a classic case of an indirect kiss. Everyone around looked on with expressions of shock and excitement at this unique scene until Q's saw Taniyama passing by but said nothing about it. Returning to the election topic, he mentioned that to defeat Yuki, they would need a campaign that attracted students to his side, using Kanzaki's candidacy as an example. Kanzaki had been elected despite running against a former president from an elementary school. His strategy was that the journalism club published articles mocking and belittling him, thinking he was still the chubby bullied kid from school. However, people saw his significant transformation along with his grades. Seeing this as a case of overcoming adversity, people began to support him for the presidency. So Alia having such a story would be beneficial. With that said, the two turned to the table and started wondering what to do with the spoon that had the indirect kiss, until Q's confessed that the situation made him a bit nervous. Alia teased her friend, thinking he was better with girls. He asked if this was really common in Russia, and she replied in her native language that she would only do this with him. Q's was starting to anticipate such responses, so he didn't freak out this time. Returning to the presidency topic, he said they needed to build a great opening speech for the student body to start laying out the strategy they had discussed. Although Alia wasn't sure exactly what to say, Q's advised that the key was to be spontaneous and not hide anything from the people, as this creates real identification. After all, he found the Russian girl captivating just the way she was. With that, she replied in Russian that she wanted more compliments and would love to know in detail what he meant by that. Setting that aside, a spicy dish Q's ordered was served at the table. When he offered some, the girl was terrified of embarrassing herself in front of the boy she liked, but wanted to be the good sport and accepted a spoonful. While the angel and devil in the boy's mind debated whether to do it or not, Q's apologized for what he was about to do and ended up giving her some, also tense. In the small bowl he separated, there was simply an entire chili pepper, which Alia put entirely in her mouth and chewed. Naturally, the reaction wasn't great, to the point of calling her friend an idiot in Russian. On the way home, the poor girl was still all spicy but pretended to be okay. But what burned inside her most was the desire to beat Yuki in the election. Regarding this, she wanted to know who her rival would choose as vice president. But Q's thought thought it didn't matter much. However, as it would have to be someone who had been on the council, maybe she would choose Taniyama, which would be bad news since that girl went to the end in the elementary school election and won alongside Yuki at the time. Speaking of which, Kyu's remembered that Taniyama gave up becoming president that year. The next day, speaking of this, Yuki introduced Kimishima Ayano from Class 1C to the council. Ayano stated that she would take care of general council matters alongside Kyu's Masachika, so Kyu's glared at his sister, knowing she was certainly planning something. The next day, the new member of the student council is chasing after the guy with her passive-aggressive demeanor, asking to talk to him in an eerily formal manner. After cornering him, she states that her master is extremely disappointed with the fact that Kyu's is supporting the younger Kyu's for the presidency, leaving Yuki-sama in the dust. Hearing this, Kyu's curses the old man who had said that if the boy left, the two of them would be nothing more than strangers, and that the young man would not be allowed to call himself Yuki's brother. Despite this, Kimishima Ayano says she wasn't sent by the master to say these things. She came to ask on her own accord because as Yuki's assistant, it is her job to evaluate any and all threats to her. Kyu's mocks the excessive loyalty of this figure and wants to know if the girl is an unpaid samurai, but Ayano ignores the provocation and emphasizes that she doesn't believe Kyu's is willing to cause Yuki any suffering. Kyu's responds that he isn't supporting Alia to oppose Yuki and that this is an unfortunate consequence. Either way, Ayano states that this makes them rivals, then asks if the boy sees his support for the Russian as a priority in this matter to the point of betraying Yuki and hurting her feelings. Without hesitation, Kyu's makes it clear that yes, he does, causing a slight reaction on Ayano's usually cold face. Showing his honor, Kyu's adds that he promised to do everything in his power to make Asahi the student council president. Ayano considers this is being done because the boy has special feelings for the girl, but he insists that no, he decided this simply because he wanted to. Thus, he asks the old man's servant to tell him not to bother Yuki with this, and if he has something to say to Kyu's to say it directly to his face. Ayano understands the rival's position, and lastly asks if she can trust that Kyu's love for Yuki remains the same, and he confirms that it has never changed. The girl thanks him for the conversation and leaves, and Kyu's realizes that his sister is really upset about this whole mess. Later in the classroom, Takeshi is showing off the new cover of Young Blah Blah this week with bikini-clad girls and wants to know from Kyu's who his favorite is. The boy claims he doesn't understand anything about idols, so his friend complains that the guy sounds like an old man talking and that it's just about choosing based on looks. So Kyu's points to one of the girls in the magazine, making Hikaru note that she looks like Masha, which the other friend agrees with. Kyu's gets thoughtful about this and grabs the magazine, arguing that that girl has a boyfriend. Hikaru then asks if it would be okay to go for her if she didn't, making Kyu's increasingly defensive. The situation worsens when Alia sneaks up behind Kyu's and calls him a pervert in Russian, also stating that bringing such a magazine is not the behavior of a council member. Kyu's defends himself by saying that Takeshi brought it, and the Russian girl reminds him that the procedure is to reprimand the perverted colleague, not look at the magazine with him. Changing the subject to ease the tension, Takeshi asks if Kyu's would date Yuki, and he replies that not in a million years because he prefers someone who is also his best friend. In Russian, Alia asks if that someone would be her unsettling the Japanese boy and making him remember his first crush. Actually, he would love to be with a girl with a beautiful smile, and his friends add qualities that Alia doesn't necessarily have, further embarrassing the Russian girl. To avoid driving the girl crazy, Kyu's tells his buddies to change the subject, so Takeshi stands on the table and announces that none of this would matter if it were a girl as hot as Alia. Kyu's goes nuts and tells the idiot to calm down, but it's too late. Alia approaches and sarcastically apologizes for being just a pretty face with no charm and promptly confiscates the magazine. Meanwhile, Ayano tells Yuki that Kyu's refused to abandon the Russian girl in the race for the presidency, also informing that if the master wants to say something, it should be to his face. Yuki sees this stance as an open declaration of war, while Ayano confesses that the fantastic aggressiveness of that guy sent shockwaves through her. Yuki feels offended and asks if the girl is in love with him, and she replies that she idolizes Q's just like Yuki, but that there are no romantic feelings involved. Actually, she just wants to serve as a tool for the boy. Furious, Yuki observes that her assistant is more the submissive type, which Ayano doesn't understand. When the boss explains, the servant thanks her for the honor and informs that Q's Masachika still sees Yuki as the most important person in the world to him. Yuki reacts by running to the window and almost shouting her love for him for everyone to hear with sparkling eyes for how cute her brother is. Even so, she doesn't forget that the guy is determined to keep fighting against her, so she ensures that things are going to get very serious. To lift the candidate's morale, Ayano reports that most students see her master as the favorite, and moreover they view the Russian girl's candidacy with some hostility, as if it were an affront to challenge Yuki Suo. Faced with the facts, the favorite wonders what Q's will do to turn the tide. At the same time, she is excited to face her brother directly, the greatest prodigy the Suo family has ever developed, the man who has always been better than her in all aspects, but who now faces his first defeat alongside a formidable ally, Alia Kujo. In the end, Yuki ensures that she will kill two birds with one stone. After this whole speech, she asks Ayano if she sounded like the final boss of the game. Speaking of the game, the council girls are now playing poker using chocolate as chips, and Yuki shows the Russian who's boss. Observing the clash, Q's recognizes that Yuki has quick thinking, while Sarashina loudly declares that it's very easy to read Alia's intentions. While Q's complains about the volume of her voice, her boyfriend agrees, saying that the Russian girl may have everything, but she doesn't have the face of someone who can bluff, unlike her older sister. Sarashina adds that Masha is seen as a model of virtue, but she has some very strange behaviors from time to time. When Q's explains that the girl has her own special vibe, Sarashina responds again loudly that special must be what they call a moron, prompting Q's to complain about the volume again. Then Ayano arrives offering more juice, and Kanzaki comments that she has a unique way of behaving. The girl explains that she learned to be this way from her grandparents because they used to serve Yuki's family. Since she admired them greatly, she decided to follow in their footsteps from a young age and is happy to serve Yuki today. Q's asks the girl to give a break with this happy slave talk, so Ayano apologizes with a look full of love and respect for the boy instead of anger, which he notices immediately and doesn't understand why. Kanzaki asks why Ayano moves without making any noise, and she explains that her grandparents taught her that a servant should never stand out. When she was a child, at the first sound, she made the old folks had a piece of wood ready to use. Masha sits with the boys after Alia told her to shut up and leave, and Kanzaki is afraid of how heated things might get. Q's asks him to relax because Alia is enjoying the game, but the president can't tell if that twisted, sweaty face of the Russian girl signifies happiness in her homeland. When the juice runs out, Masha releases Ayano from having to buy more and offers to buy another bottle herself, but she calls Q's to accompany her since he is also an honoree at this welcome party alongside assistant Yuki. Speaking of Yuki, she asks for a cafe au lait while Alia wants ashiruko. Kanzaki asks for a cider and his girlfriend opts for soda. Ayano just wants water. Forgetting that he's going along, Masha asks for lemon tea. Impatient, Q's pulls the girls so they can get going. In the hallway, she thanks him for helping with her sister's candidacy because she never had anyone to lean on, and it's important that Q's plays this role. The boy wants to know if her older sister is shirking the responsibility of supporting the younger one, and Masha responds that she loves her sister more than anything for her determined nature. When they were younger, the older one took care of the little one as best she could without thinking she owned her or anything like that. After all, living with tense shoulders gets tiring, and the most important thing is to stay relaxed. Anyway, sibling relationships are complicated, and she doesn't want Alia to be isolated since their closeness creates a certain competition. Likewise, Q's understands this feeling well, but he just can't feel inferior to Yuki because she has no qualms about showing her love and admiration for him. Without expressing this feeling, he merely comments that Masha seems to be a caring older older sister, which she agrees with but asks that this conversation stays between them. Q's understands why Masha wants to keep this a secret, which he also does, although he doesn't have as good a reason as the girl. In reality, Q's plays the lazy role, so no one needs him for anything. Faced with this confession, Masha strokes the boy's hair and assures him that he's doing his best and everything will be fine. Embarrassed, Q's frowns, but inside he feels like melted butter, as he always does when he's near Masha. Later, after the gathering, Alia is in the hallway and is approached by Taniyama Sayaka from Class F. Sayaka was Yuki's opponent in the elementary school election and heard that the Russian girl is running this year. Bluntly, the girl claims that Alia should be ashamed for playing this role because she stole the running mate Yuki had in mind, assuming it was just to annoy the rival candidate. Alia gets nervous at this insinuation from the stranger, as if she were capable of doing something dishonest just to get Q's to support her for president. Regardless, Sayaka doesn't seem willing to change her mind about this and claims that it doesn't matter how Alia achieved this, but the fact that she pulled a lazy guy onto her ticket proves it was just to irritate the opponent. Q's was passing by and sees that things are getting heated, so he decides to intervene. Alia explains that the weird girl is accusing her of stealing him just to annoy Yuki, so the boy steps in and states that he decided on his own to join Alia Kujo's campaign. Even with Q's himself explaining, Sayaka doesn't believe it for a moment, because according to her, the guy had been slacking off for a long time. Relentless, she just wants to know what motivated him to form a team with this transferred Russian girl, and Q's admits he was slacking off but doesn't want to hear any stories. He volunteered to work with Alia and Yuki, accepted the decision without any fuss, so there's no more to discuss. Moreover, he wants Sayaka to apologize for insulting his running mate. In response, Taniyama Sayaka claims that in the end, it's Q's who is wrong, then approaches him and challenges the guy to the student congress. The crowd around them gets excited just hearing these words and gathers to watch the confrontation. According to Sayaka, someone like Q's shouldn't have a place on the student council, let alone as vice president. The girl goes further and calls Alia a puppet, so the Russian girl takes it personally and now steps up for the fight as well. Thus, Sayaka declares she will defeat them both in argument. The next day, Kanzaki reads that the topic of the Congress debate is introducing the selection of teachers for participation in the student council. Q's gets upset because his rival chose this subject, knowing that his reputation among the teachers isn't great, so the president questions if they really plan to go through with this. Alia emphasizes that winning would be important to strengthen her candidacy, especially since that girl insulted her and her running mate right to their faces. Likewise, Q's supports the decision to participate in the Congress because it would allow them to promote Alia's candidacy earlier. With that, Kanzaki gives the two the green light for the event and asks someone to plan the announcement of the debate, which Yuki volunteers to do. With her passive-aggressive manner, the girl wishes Alia and Q's good luck. Later in the afternoon, the two are busy discussing what to expect from the Congress. The running mate speculates that their opponent might use a certain line of argument and wants to know how Alia would respond to it. After reading her speech on paper, he praises what's written, suggesting only that she make it a bit more concise. Putting that aside, the Russian girl asks if her friend doesn't get along with Taniyama, which he confirms, although they respected each other when they worked together. Since that's the case, Alia doesn't understand why she was so rude, which he also doesn't get, though he suspects Taniyama thinks he's only participating in the election for fun. Apparently, Taniyama has a poor impression of Q's because he was Yuki's partner in the last election, but abandoned her even though she was the favorite to work with someone else. With this, Alia was now certain she was the reason behind this conflict. Seeing his partner's downcast expression, Q's asks if she's okay, but Alia lifts her head and assures him she'll give it her all tomorrow. The sun rises after that day, and already at school, the pair is approached by a girl named Miyami Nonoa, Taniyama's running mate. Although she already knew Q's, she introduces herself to Alia Kujo, who does the same and wishes the girl a good debate. Nonoa jokes that the Russian seems too serious and then leaves. Afterward, Q's comments that Taniyama and this girl have been childhood friends, and despite being opposites, they complement each other. Miyami, being very popular, gets along well with everyone, which is a big advantage when it comes to elections. However, Q's asks his partner not to worry about that today because her focus should be on Taniyama. In the auditorium moments before the Congress, two students comment that Taniyama will face the transfer student, who is isn't well known by anyone, with most people only aware that she gets good grades. Speaking of her, the young Russian student steps onto the stage, her mind flooded with doubts about her ability to hold people's attention. The last time she tried to do this, she was overshadowed by the football and baseball teams, but she knows she has to give her best also for Q's, who agreed to help her in this election. Among the spectators, most doubted the newcomer's ability to deliver her speech, imagining she would be crushed by Taniyama. On stage, Q's suddenly appears and asks if Alia by any chance is a size E cup, which offends the girl at such a delicate moment. Q's responds that this is the perfect moment because he can't get hit in front of everyone, then asks if the joke relieved a bit of her stress. When she doesn't answer, Q's frowns and asks who Alia is facing today. She responds that she's going head-to-head with Taniyama, but the boy reveals that in reality she's up against the idealized and perfect version of herself. Therefore, the Russian doesn't need to act as if she's perfection incarnate, but should rather be natural and try to enjoy the process. If something goes wrong, of course, he'll be there to fix whatever is needed. The student congress is then announced, the lights dim, and Kanzaki mentions that the students who proposed the debate were Taniyama Sayaka and Miyami Nonoa, while the opponents would be Alisa Kujo and Q's Masachika, noting that the topic will be introducing the selection of teachers for participation in the student council. Responsible for opening the debate, Taniyama starts by reminding everyone that currently the council members are chosen by the president and vice president, but the truth is they accept any participant. With this in mind, Taniyama mentions a survey of former council members which stated that this was the case in the last 3 terms. In the midst of this, Q's thinks it's an exaggeration for the girl to have collected data just to mention this, but imagines Miyami is the mastermind behind this nonsense. Taniyama continues asserting that the council should be made up of skilled individuals. Once a student becomes a council representative, even a low-performing student can rise above others in the school's social hierarchy, and Taniyama finds this quite displeasing. After saying this, the students in the auditorium exchange thoughtful glances, and Q's acknowledges that the girl speaks with confidence. Then Taniyama proposes that teachers should approve the chosen candidates as a prerequisite because only the most qualified should become council representatives, creating a much more capable and respected body. At the end of her speech, Taniyama thanks everyone for their attention and steps down from the podium. Kanzaki invites the opposition to respond, so Alia stands up without hesitation and heads to the microphone. The students around make some jokes about the known Ice Queen, but are curious about what she is capable of. Alia remembers her friend's advice about being herself and enjoying the process, and she prepares to do just that. She introduces herself as Kujo, treasurer of the student council. In her opinion, while Taniyama believes that including teachers in the process of accepting council students could improve the quality of representatives, the Russian thinks the exact opposite. After all, this infringes on the student council's authority by taking away the president and vice president's power to appoint their representatives. Since these are the 2 highest positions in the council, both are selected by the students' vote, and because they won a contest as fierce as an election, they are granted privileges by the academy. The main one is being able to choose their subordinates, and no part of this should be handed over to the teachers. That would be to say that the student council cannot function on its own without their intervention, and this academy prides itself on respecting the students' autonomy, which is why a great deal of power is vested in the student council. If teachers are included in the approval process, the council presidents will lose the ability to choose trusted subordinates and will also be unable to reject any recommendations made by the teachers. Just behind his companion, Q's feels relieved to see that Alia remains strong. Observing the audience, he realizes that both opposing arguments are valid, which is why the students are so divided. Meanwhile, Taniyama stares directly at Q's, suspecting that he wrote the entire speech for the Russian, which isn't true. At that moment, Alia finishes her speech and Kanzaki announces the beginning of the debate. Taniyama interrupts the proceedings and brings up that the student council recently accepted all the volunteers. Alia steps in, arguing that this didn't cause any problems, so she questions why the girl is so bothered by it. The rival responds that it's essential to involve teachers in the selection process to prevent a decline in performance, but the Russian reiterates that it's up to the council president and vice president to determine this, as they can identify management deficiencies themselves and seek help from the teachers. In the midst of this, Kyu's reflects that Taniyama underestimated her true adversary by focusing only on him, and now she's unprepared to face Alya Kujo. Annoyed, Taniyama questions what would happen if the council president abuses their power. Alongside this, students debate whether a Russian outsider would truly understand what's happening at the academy, having arrived so recently, unlike Taniyama. To make matters worse, Alya ends up stumbling and forgets the response she was going to give. She knows she needs to think quickly, but the pressure causes her anxiety to spike, blurring her vision. At that moment, Kyu's touches his companion and praises her good work, then asks to take over the situation. First, he announces that his companion's throat is dry, and that's the price for not being used to talking to others. With this joke, Kyu's eases the pressure on himself and lightens the atmosphere. Then he questions everyone whether it's really necessary to debate this, and his words leave everyone present confused. Kyu's argues that the students already resolved this debate before it even began by electing Kanzaki as the council president. Kanzaki was a lazy student who barely paid attention in class, meaning the kind of student who would never be approved by a teacher for this role. As he finishes this sentence in a humorous tone, Kyu's gains even more sympathy from the audience, provoking several laughs. Then he delivers the twist in the story, reminding everyone that the current council president turned things around by improving his grades and becoming an excellent representative. This case was only possible because the system allows individuals with goodwill and determination to run for leadership positions, which is why Kyu's asks once again if it's necessary to raise this debate. With that, Kanzaki confesses that he's still processing the bullying he just took, but since no one speaks up, he intends to move on to the final considerations. Finally, he asks if the opposition has anything else to say, but instead of reacting at the podium, Taniyama gives up and leaves the stage. Alya goes after her, and it's unclear whether it's to support her or to give her a piece of her mind. Either way, Miyami sees no other option and admits defeat. At this point, Taniyama reflected that she saw Kyu's and Yuki as the perfect duo due to their intelligence and strong bond. Because of this, she accepted her defeat back then without much resistance, even though she felt a bit envious. Now, seeing Kyu's with another candidate, Taniyama feels somehow betrayed by the idealized vision she had of the duo she once considered unbeatable, and that's why she expresses her anger when Alya catches up with her. After calming down a bit, she admits that she played the fool by putting the duo on a pedestal and placing all her faith in them. At that moment, Taniyama's friend arrives and asks to take control of the situation. Alya agrees without hesitation, but before leaving, she confesses that she doesn't know why Kyu's chose her, but her only wish is to meet his expectations to the point where Taniyama might one day see the two of them as the new most promising duo at the school. With that, the Russian leaves and Miyami admires her, something even Taniyama does this time. That's why she decides to apologize for the trouble she caused. In charge of the events lighting, Yuki comments that her brother was a pushover for taking so long to resolve this debate, and that this naivety will be his downfall in the elections. On the other hand, Ayano thinks the guy did well with the Russian, so her boss complains that the most important thing is to appear confident and cool instead of praising the opponent. Ayano points out that characters with these traits are usually the ones who lose in the end, and reminds her that drinking coffee inside this room is not allowed. Later, Alya shares what was going through Taniyama's mind, which is why she promises to convince her and Kyu's that she is the best choice for president. Taking advantage of the moment, Kyu's reveals that he competed with Yuki in the previous election because he couldn't refuse, as he felt guilty about something that happened in his childhood. This guilt led him to lower himself to the point of never wanting to stand out so much, so that he was called the vice president of the shadows. However, now he's running because he genuinely wants to stand by Alya's side. Then he asks why the Russian accepted him as her vice, to which she responds in Russian something Kyu's isn't sure he understood. Soon after, she laughs and asks the boy to leave, but not before questioning what kind of silly joke that was about her chest. Embarrassed, Kyu's explains that a girl once said that Alya was probably an E-cup, so he just repeated the joke. In turn, Alia responds in Russian that it's almost that and leaves irritated. As night fell over a luxurious mansion, the family patriarch was discussing with Yuki about the conference where Q's Masachika had debated against the heiress of Taniyama Industries. The man recalled that this girl had competed with Yuki until the end of the elementary school presidential election, so he had expected great things from her and not that she would back out in the middle of the debate. Yuki simply replied that she must have had her reasons, and the man understood that whatever they were, it gave Q's campaign legitimacy. In any case, he reminded Yuki that she must not lose no matter who her opponent might be, and the girl acknowledged her grandfather's words. He emphasized that perhaps the girl was not as talented as Masachika, but at least Yuki understood that with great gifts come great responsibilities that Masachika had run away from. He was born with incomparable talents and unmatched privileges, but he threw it all away. For this reason, losing to him was something that could never happen. After this conversation, Yuki's mother asked if she was still close to Q's. Upon hearing that she was the woman felt relieved and told her daughter not to worry about it. After closing her bedroom door, Yuki demanded a hug from Ayano, but just a hug wasn't enough for her, so Yuki rubbed her face against the maid until she felt better. The next day, the boys at school commented to Q's that he did an excellent job at the conference. Q's sat down and noticed that Alia was as distant as ever, so he said that the guys there wanted to know more about her exploits last week. However, the boys didn't seem very interested in starting a conversation with the Russian girl, so Q's kicked the desk of the friend sitting in front of him, and the guy got the hint. This friend then asked if Kujo had written her own speech, and she replied somewhat surprised that she had. The boy said he was impressed by that and praised her speechwriting skills. Soon the others also got involved in the conversation until two of them insulted Taniyama for running away in the middle of the debate. Hearing this, Alia stood up with a scowl and left. Q's went after his friend to the student council room to see what was bothering her, because it seemed that Taniyama being ridiculed really upset her. The Russian girl turned around to defend her debate opponent, but Q's interrupted her, saying that they both knew why she did what she did, and above all, they had done nothing wrong. On the contrary, they had competed fairly, so there was no need to be concerned about what people said or didn't say about Taniyama. Alia understood what her friend meant, but she felt that it wasn't really a victory since their opponents simply gave up. Q's pointed out that if the plan was to help the girl recover, it would mean their victory at the conference would be lost. Still, he scratched his head and conceded, saying that what mattered was doing what was right. At this, Alia took the opportunity to state that she intended to help Taniyama, and so she gained Masachika's support. He argued that it was better to deal with it now than to keep putting it off, and besides, it would make for a much smoother closing ceremony. Even so, the Russian girl was afraid of causing too much trouble for the boy, but he reassured her that he was there by her side, no matter what, which touched her deeply. With that said, Q's noticed the office chair swaying and realized someone was there. Under the desk, Kanzaki and his girlfriend had squeezed themselves into whatever space they could to avoid being discovered, but they ended up giving themselves away in the end. Q's thought it looked like something straight out of a romantic comedy, but regardless, as a good underclassman, he intended to pretend he saw nothing. The problem was that another romantic comedy scene began to unfold before his eyes when Alia took a step forward. Then she took another, while Q's scrambled to find something to distract her with as quickly as possible. With no other option, he ordered Sarashina and the student council president to come out of hiding and made them promise that everyone there would pretend they hadn't seen or heard anything, which the two in hiding thought was a brilliant idea. Afterward, Q's and Alia left the room, and the Russian girl was so embarrassed that she pretended to remember some responsibility and bolted out of there. Meanwhile, in Nonoa's classroom, the girl was chatting with her friends about fashion while they all stared at their phones, and this scene made Q's roll his eyes, certain he wouldn't be able to join in on that conversation. One of Nonoa's friends invited her to a party at her house on Sunday, but the girl was feeling a bit down because exams were coming up. Even so, she joked that she was just kidding and confirmed her attendance at the party. At that moment, she noticed Q's was watching and called out to him. Embarrassed, the boy preferred not to say why he was there in front of everyone, so he met with Nonoa in a vacant room. Once there, she teased him, saying he didn't need to make such a big deal out of asking her out, so Q's, surprised, asked if she would actually like that to happen. With the same bravado, she replied that she was single and even liked the boy, but that she had never dated someone she really liked, as if she didn't quite understand this whole love and romance thing. Hughes didn't want to get involved, but since he was already involved, he commented that the girl shouldn't be so easygoing if she didn't like it, and she responded that Taniyama had said the same thing to her, but with a slap as a bonus. Taking the cue, Hughes noted that people at school were bad-mouthing Taniyama, so it would be good to do something to change that. Nonoa found it funny that the boy would come to talk to her about it, given that she saw the two of them as enemies. In fact, she confessed that she had even infiltrated the audience. About this, Hughes was surprised that the girl would risk her friendships like that, but she replied that she didn't care about losing any friendship other than Taniyama's. Hughes assumes that people like Taniyama who have a burning flame within them must be a complete mystery to Nonoa. She adds that someone who possesses a brightness you lack will always be attractive. In fact, Nonoa believes that both she and Hughes are unhappy cynics clinging to their radiant partners, so she jokes that an evil scheme should be concocted in this room right now. Masachika prefers to stay on the good side and suggests that the two of them spread a rumor to justify Taniyama's abrupt exit from that day's debate. Nonoa points out that this could cast doubt on his victory, but Hughes is already aware of that. With nothing to lose, Nonoa agrees to the plan and leaves without further ado. Just as abruptly, Ayano shows up in the room with Yuki, startling the boy. Yuki accuses her brother of getting close to Nonoa, an enemy, and that's why they decided to eavesdrop on the conversation. Not buying this story, Hughes asks for the real reason, and the girl reveals that she was pretending to have a secret meeting, not realizing an actual secret meeting would be taking place. To make matters worse, Alia appears at the door and sees her running mate chatting with their opponents, immediately frowning. Hughes asks her not to jump to conclusions, and although Alia pretends everything is fine, she leaves pouting and cursing him in Russian. Yuki teases Hughes, saying this scene is typical of someone who goes to deliver a thank you meal to others but ends up revealing a sinister secret of the one who helped them so much. With that, Hughes tells her to stop imagining cliché scenes. In a flashback, Taniyama saw Nonoa with a boy and confronted her friend because it was a different guy than before. Nonoa didn't pay much attention and replied that he's her boyfriend now, so she doesn't see a problem with it. However, Taniyama slapped her, saying that Nonoa sells herself too easily and should value herself more. Remembering this, Nonoa touches her face, thinking her friend shouldn't have been so angry. Upon returning to the classroom, the first thing she does is spread the rumor to her classmates, saying that Taniyama fled the debate because she was mad at her after finding out Nonoa had planted spies in the audience. Meanwhile, in another classroom, Hughes tries to explain to Alia that he ran into Yuki and Ayano by chance, but the Russian doesn't seem to believe him, pretending to be happy about seeing three childhood friends so close. Fed up with the drama, Hughes changes the subject and asks if she wants to study with him after class. Alia asks if this is some kind of joke offending him. Regardless, they end up meeting in the student council room, though Alia was sitting too close to Hughes in his opinion. She asks if there's a problem, and he says no, but inside he's terrified of someone seeing them so close. No sooner had he said that than Yuki and Ayano show up asking to study alongside them. Alia in Russian mutters that she would rather be alone with Hughes, nearly giving him a heart attack. During the study session, Alia notices that Hughes is only looking at the solutions to the problems instead of learning how to solve them, so Yuki and Ayano explain that this guy has always studied like this for some reason. Changing the subject, he asks Ayano if she has any questions, and seeing that she was reluctant to admit she did, he assures her that he won't make fun of her or anything. On the other hand, Ayano would have preferred Masachika to scold her in this case and call her a useless waste of space, so she's disappointed. Alia butts in and asks if the three of them are really childhood friends, because somehow they seem even closer than that. However, before the question is answered, Masha enters the room with her famous tea and serves it to everyone. She finds a book on hypnosis and asks whose it is, so Hughes explains that Sarashina confiscated it from someone the other day. The girl whines for her sister to hypnotize her, but Alia ignores her, so Masha starts pestering Hughes, who doesn't know how to say no. Soon he's simply trying a hypnotic induction on the girl, asking her to focus on his finger and repeating that she's getting sleepier and sleepier, and when he claps his hands, she'll fall into a deep sleep. After doing so, the girl completely knocks out, so Q's quickly flips to the part where the hypnosis is undone. According to the book, the person in charge should touch the hypnotized person's shoulder, which he does, bringing Masha back to reality. Alya doesn't believe her sister is telling the truth, so Yuki suggests that she be hypnotized to see for herself. So Q's repeats the process and proves he's already become a master of hypnosis by putting the Russian girl to sleep, even catching Masha indirectly. Yuki sees the potential for mischief in this situation and suggests a more mischievous act of hypnosis, while Ayano was thinking of something more innocent like discovering a personal secret from the two. Ignoring the maid's suggestion, Yuki induces the two girls to become increasingly flirtatious, so they both stand up and Masha pulls Alya and Q's onto her lap. Yuki gets frustrated because she didn't expect Masha to be the one to form a harem, while Q's asks to leave but isn't allowed to. Alya feels uncomfortable in her clothes and starts taking them off slowly, with Masha following suit. Q's taps the Russian girl's shoulder before things get out of hand, while her sister taps Masha, but it doesn't work. At that moment, Sarashina opens the door and sees the whole scene, so Yuki quickly explains what's happening. Thus, Sarashina springs into action and neutralizes the hypnotized girls with slaps, waking them up. Then she gets ready to beat up Q's for seeing the girls in such a state. After all the chaos involving hypnosis, a Russian-Japanese girl, and death threats, all Q's Masachika wanted was a bit of peace at home so he could study in peace. However, his mind couldn't stay focused on his work because Brain Hazard, the coolest anime of the moment, was about to release its latest episode. Q's wrestled with himself to forget about the anime and concentrate on studying, but the truth was it just wasn't happening. Glancing at the clock, he realized the episode had already been released, and he found himself caught in that classic mental debate between leisure and responsibility. In the midst of this, Alya called, though she didn't have a specific reason for doing so. Playfully, he asked if she missed hearing his voice, and Alya responded in Russian, asking if there was anything wrong with that. The moment Q's heard those words, all he could do was imagine himself falling to the floor. He remembered that Q's had told her he tended to get silly when he was alone, so she asked if he was managing to study. Q's admitted he was having trouble staying focused and wanted to know how Alya managed to keep her head straight in moments like this. With that to keep his mind motivated, Alya suggested a bet. Since their exams were starting the next day, if Masachika placed among the top 30 students in the school, she'd do anything he asked. If not, she would get to make the request. Without thinking too much, Q's said it sounded like a good deal either way. But he quickly realized his mistake and warned her up front that he wasn't interested in any masochistic demands or anything of the sort. Alya brushed that off and said the name in Russian, claiming she had just given him a hint. Q's pretended he didn't understand, and the two sealed the deal. Curiously, Alya didn't seem too bothered by his outburst, which had been happening more often lately. So Q's pointed out that she was starting to get under her big brother's skin. Alya quickly reminded him that they were the same age, but Q's noted that her birthday was on November 7th, while his was on April 9th, which made him older. After making that observation, Q's noticed that Alya's enthusiasm in the conversation had waned, so he awkwardly said goodbye. As he hung up, he reflected on the fact that Alya had somehow figured out he was losing focus, and he wondered if they were developing a mental connection. In truth, Alya had called because she was spooked by a horror movie she'd watched, but she couldn't bring herself to admit that to him. What bothered her most, though, was learning that Q's birthday had already passed and he hadn't said a word. That hurt her feelings, as she couldn't understand how her best friend could do something like that. 5 days later, Q's complimented Alya on her performance in the exams, but she responded with a hint of coldness. To lighten the mood, Q's quickly thought on his feet and invited her to talk about the graduation ceremony on their way home. As they walked, Q's found it odd that Alya hadn't flirted with him in Russian, even once since their phone call. Curious, he asked why she had been acting differently since the start of exam season, and Alya lamented that she hadn't managed to hide it very well. Q's noted that she had done a great job concealing her feelings, but even so, he had picked up on it. Seizing the moment, Alya asked if he cared enough to pay that much attention to her. He assured her that he did, because Alya was a precious partner. His words softened her mood, and her cheeks flushed red as her inner turmoil stemmed from needing reassurance that she she was important to Q's Masachika. Still, she wanted to know why he hadn't invited her to his birthday party, so she worked up the courage to ask. Q's explained that he hadn't thrown a party at all, assuming that celebrating birthdays must be a Russian thing. After all, he hadn't had a birthday party since elementary school. Nevertheless, this was the perfect opportunity for him to ask if Alia had really wanted to celebrate his birthday with him. She defensively explained that in Russia, not inviting someone to your birthday meant you didn't want that person in your life anymore. Q's wasn't entirely convinced by that story, but he invited Alia to celebrate his belated birthday anyway, as a way to prove he valued their friendship. The next day, they planned a celebration 3 months late and met up in town. Q's felt the heat, but knew it was better to be dressed this way than in the long-sleeved uniform. As Alia mentioned that the student council president was looking into getting cooler uniforms for the school, Q's glanced around and noticed that everyone was staring at them. When he looked back at Alia Kujo, he saw that familiar aura of beauty surrounding her, and it made him understand why she attracted so much attention. He commented on it, and she explained that it was simply the price of being beautiful. He imagined she would get hit on a lot if she were alone, and indeed she did, though Alia often responded in Russian until they gave up. Q's was glad that Alia didn't let any smooth talkers string her along, to which she pointed out that his reaction showed a possessive streak, almost as if they were a couple. Q's admitted that he tended to act that way when he was out on a date. Embarrassed Alia, who had realized she was indeed on a date with the boy she liked, commented in Russian that it was her first time, though Q's wasn't sure if she meant her first time with him or her first date ever. They soon arrived at Casa du Bife, a restaurant that was usually pricey but offered some great lunch deals. Once inside, Q's gave a quick rundown of how the graduation ceremony worked. First, the candidates for student council president would present their political goals, followed by their running mates explaining why they supported their candidate. Then came the most important part. Even though the event didn't involve a formal vote, there was something similar to it. After each pair speaks, the audience reacts, and the crowd applauds only for whoever they want to win. Alia asks if it's possible for a candidate to receive no applause at all, and Q's explains that it is. In fact, he imagines they won't be able to match Yuki's applause due to her popularity, so their goal is to keep the gap from being too large. Alia thinks this strategy is too defensive, but Q's considers it a realistic assessment of the current situation. Speaking of which, he plans for their team to give their speech before the competitor, because the first speaker often gets a more subdued reaction, while the crowd weighs its options, giving them an excuse if Yuki outshines them. Alia doesn't like the idea and shoots Q's a dirty look, so he tries to lighten the mood and asks if the clever girl would rather play dirty, like messing with their opponents' heads. With that, Alia softens a bit, and her partner eases the tension by assuring her that Yuki wouldn't stoop so low either, since she's nothing like Miyami no Noah. Alia asks what he means by that, but their food arrives just in time, and the two turn their attention to celebrating the belated birthday. Before long, Alia wonders if her running mate started the rumor about Miyami, but he pretends it was all her initiative. Either way, it buried the issue with Taniyama, but also buried the results of the Congress. Alia regrets that happening, but thanks her friend for prioritizing her during the process. With that, Q's gets flustered and turns away, so Alia, for the first time in Japanese, comments that the boy looks really cute when he's embarrassed, then offers him a piece of meat to feed him. Everyone around is tense, expecting a climax, while Q's casually eats the meat and notices the girl using the same fork afterward without a care. After the meal, Alia gives her friend a mug as a gift, and he jokes that it looks like something couples buy in pairs. Alia confesses that he read her mind because that's exactly what she did. Her matching mug is already safely stored at home. Hearing this, Q's almost loses his composure, but tries to hold it together to avoid falling completely for the Russian girl. Back at school, while they wait for their turn in the meeting with the teachers and parents, Kanzaki wants to discuss the proposal for summer uniforms with the student council members. Masha stands up to make some tea and asks Ayano to relax, as the girl also stood up just as someone started doing a task. Dismissed from her duties, the poor girl freezes. Kanzaki informs them that they should be able to implement the new uniforms after summer break, so they plan to make a surprise announcement at the closing ceremony. Yuki supports the idea, saying no one should have to wear a blazer in this heat, while the president gives all the credit for this achievement to his beloved Sarashina. She does the same, and the two enter their own little love world in front of everyone. Amid this, Masha awkwardly awkwardly serves Kyu's a cup of tea, and the boy deduces that she's still bothered by the whole hypnosis incident. Then Kanzaki's parents inform him they've arrived, so it's time for his meeting. Masha mentions that she'll wash the dishes and Kyu's offers to help. While doing the task, the boy takes the opportunity to apologize for the hypnosis, but she reminds him it was her idea. In fact, she's curious to know what she did to him while she was hypnotized, so Kyu's tells her that she pulled him and Alia in and started stroking both of their heads. The girl is relieved it didn't go beyond that, though she's heard that Kyu's was watching while they were hypnotized. Despite the situation, the boy finds her more cute than intimidating with that angry face. To punish him, Masha squeezes and pulls his cheeks, teaching him that you shouldn't mess with a girl like that. Just then, Masha's mom calls her to join the meeting, leaving Kyu's to finish up the task. After washing the dishes, Masachika returns to the student council room, where Yuki takes advantage of their alone time to clear some things up. Before that, Kyu's mentions he's going to pick up his grandfather, so the girl forcefully hugs him to avoid being ignored, saying she's felt really lonely without her big brother around and wants to be pampered here and now. Kyu's plays along for a moment, but is interrupted when his grandfather calls to say he's arrived. Meeting the old man at the entrance, Kyu's jokes that he looks like an Italian mobster in that white suit, to which his grandfather replies that he forgot to put on his sunglasses to complete the look. The young man asks where he got those clothes, and the old man explains that he spent his entire pension to buy them for today. Later, the grandfather asks if Kyotaru is too busy to come today, and Kyu's explains that he was just transferred to the Japanese embassy in England. In the middle of this idle chatter, Alia shows up and is practically ambushed by Kyu's grandfather. The boy explains that this crazy man is obsessed with Russia while trying to keep him in check. Beside the girl, Alia's mother finally introduces herself as Kujo Akemi and mentions that her daughter always talks about the boy at home. Embarrassed, Kyu's hopes it's all good things until he notices his grandfather has disappeared. The old man had wandered off to ask the Russian girl to marry Masachika and join the family, forcing Kyu's to regain control over the madman. Alia's mother also teases her daughter about this marriage talk. After the meeting, Kyu's runs into a woman named Yumi, triggering a heavy memory from his childhood. When greeted by Kyu's grandfather, she returns the greeting by calling him her father-in-law. Thrown back into a memory from his childhood, Kyu's is running to show Yumi the high score he got on a test, and she praises the boy enthusiastically. One day, during a brilliant piano performance, Kyu's receives excited applause from the entire audience, but Yumi seems strangely unsettled. This made the young Kyu's realize that his performance wasn't enough to impress her, so he began practicing even more intensely. However, contrary to what he expected, Yumi became annoyed with the sound of piano playing throughout the house and told him to stop. With tears in his eyes, young Masachika stopped immediately, left speechless. At that moment, he wakes up from the nightmare, and to make matters worse, he catches a cold. Someone rings the doorbell, so he goes to answer it and sees that it's Alia. She found out from Yuki that her friend was sick and came to bring medicine at Yuki's request. Kyu's reflects that his crazy sister could have given him a heads up, but now Alia was already in front of him asking to come in. Kyu's responds that just the medicine is enough, practically pushing the girl out, but she insists that Yuki asked her to take care of him. Faced with this, Kyu's imagines that his sister is trying to drag other people into her otaku fantasies, until Alia confesses in Russian that she's lying about only coming because of Yuki's request, so he lets her into the house. Seeing her nervous at his bedroom door, Kyu's tells her to relax, but she responds irritably that everything feels a bit new to her, that's all. In Russian, she adds that the room smells like a boy. Then she asks if he prefers porridge or something else, maybe soup, since the vegetables are cooked until they're soft, making it easy to eat even when sick. He chooses soup, so she says it'll take 4 hours to be ready. Kyu's complains that it's a long wait, and Alia admits that using a pressure cooker would speed things up, but that would be blasphemy. So Kyu's switches to porridge, and the cook goes off to prepare it. While reading the recipe in the kitchen, she notices Kyu's using the mug she gave him and is filled with happiness. Sometime later, when Masachika is running a high fever, the porridge is finally ready. Seeing his friend wearing an apron and serving the bowl on a tray, he thanks her for the lovely sight, prompting the girl to sarcastically remark that he seems just fine already. Afterwards, she sits on the bed and hands him the porridge, asking if he can eat on his own. Kyu's can eat without any trouble, so he takes a bite and praises praises the taste. Embarrassed, the Russian girl doesn't respond properly to the compliment as her mind is on another question. She wants to know where Q's parents are. He tells her his dad is at work and he doesn't have a mother. After filling his stomach and taking his medicine, Q announces that he's going to sleep so Alia can feel free to leave whenever she wants. The Russian girl replies that she'll be studying in the living room in case he needs her, but that's not exactly what he meant. He was trying to hint that it was time for her to leave, but she insists on being his full-time nurse, so that's how things stay. After resting, Q wakes up after 8 in the evening, assuming his friend had already gone home, but when he opens the door, Ayano is there in his house, standing next to the Russian girl dressed in her maid outfit. Seeing her boss awake, Ayano rushes over to help him up, but he warns her to be careful with that chest of hers before he gets cancelled for no reason. Alia isn't too pleased with this conversation and orders Ayano to back off, but she insists that helping him walk is part of her duties as a maid. The Russian responds that Ayano is Yuki's maid, not Q's, causing the girl to swallow hard before explaining that her mistress asked her to take care of Masachika. In other words, Alyssa Kujo can leave the rest to her and head home. Q's is shocked at the girl's audacity to talk to Alia that way, while the maid reminds her colleague that she needs to get ready for tomorrow. Q's asks what this is about, but Alia brushes it off, saying she just has regular classes, then bids them goodbye. Keeping her cool, she asks Ayano to take care of Masachika and leaves. A little later, Ayano serves soup to the sick boy, as Alia had already prepared it. After thanking her and taking a taste, Q's compliments the food, causing the girl to blush slightly, just like the soup. After finishing eating around 9:30 p.m., fatigue sets in, and the young man decides not to bother taking a bath before bed. Given this, Ayano offers to clean him, but with a blindfold on. Q's responds that you can't really clean someone if you can't see, then lies down, so the maid decides to sleep beside the patient, or at least sing him to sleep. Realizing she's too full of energy, Q's orders her to go back to Yuki's house and end the night, a command she promptly follows. When he wakes up the next morning, Q's is feeling much better. He finds the maid cleaning the floor at 11 am, so he asks if she skipped school because of him. According to Ayano, her boss's health is more important than a mere report card. With that, she goes to prepare lunch. As she serves the food and places the medicine on the table, Q's notices something odd and asks to see the packaging of the medicine. It states that one of the side effects is drowsiness, so he asks if Yuki was the one who sent Alia with this. The maid reveals the truth. After realizing what's going on, Q's rushes to school and overhears two boys in the hallway saying that Yuki did way better than Alia, making him realize he let his guard down, thinking his sister wouldn't try anything until the closing ceremony. He runs up to Alia and asks what happened, and she apologizes for ruining everything. After calming down, she explains that everything started yesterday morning when Yuki asked to speak with her in the student council room. Yuki, saying she was busy, asked the Russian to take care of Masachika, handing over his usual medication along with his address. Besides that, she invited Alia to participate in the lunch broadcast the following day, as she was planning to discuss the recent student congress live. This would be Alia's chance to showcase her victory in the debate to everyone. The Russian responds that she doesn't want to bring up that topic again, so Yuki asks her to forget about that part, but insists she attend anyway so they can prepare the final progress report for the first term together. Under pressure, Alia ends up agreeing, and then Yuki mentions the rumor of Nonoa's cheating that's spreading throughout the school, amused that Alia is trying hard to bury her own victory in the Congress. For these and other reasons, Yuki Siwoo adopts a villainous expression and comments that the Russian is way too relaxed, then sarcastically asks if Alia really intends to win the elections. Considering that the Russian didn't sense any danger when entering her rival's territory, Yuki believes that this lack of survival instinct makes Alyssa Kujo such an easy target that she felt the need to issue a warning. After all, Masachika has a fever, so the girl should be much more cautious. Startled, the Russian suddenly realizes, asking if her rival is planning to take advantage of the guy being sick. Yuki bluntly admits that she plans to use this moment to bring down her opponent's standing as much as possible. At this point, Alia's initial shock turns into a determined glare, warning that her enemy underestimated her if she thought she could play around just because Alia was alone. Unfazed, Yuki says that Alia can ask for Masachika's help whenever she wants, but Alia Alia retorts that she won't be a burden to him. With that, Yuki declares that she's eager to see what the Ice Princess is capable of tomorrow. After the girl's departure, Alyssa Kujo promises she won't be defeated. After recounting this part of the story to Kyu's, she assures him that she prepared as best as she could, but something happened after today's class ended. Moments before the live broadcast started, Yuki apologized for how she acted the previous day, with Alia explaining that she felt awful about plotting against such a dear friend. She confessed that she had taken on too aggressive a stance, forcing herself to bet everything, but now realizes she doesn't want to ruin her friendship with Alyssa Kujo. Not sure how to respond, Alia says it's all fine and asks Yuki to raise her head, then readily accepts her apology. Yuki, relieved, admits that while it may sound like an excuse, there's a big reason she wants to become president, and that reason is her older brother. This brother was far more talented than she could ever be, and her parents and grandparents expected him to elevate the Suwu family name to a new level. However, one day he was gone, and now Yuki must bear the burden of meeting the expectations that once rested on him, finishing what he started. After sharing this story, the girls are informed that the program is about to go live. Seizing the moment, Yuki asks why Alia wants to become president. With the countdown to the live broadcast already starting, Alia stammers, unsure how to respond, especially after the deep reason her opponent had just revealed. Regardless, the show begins for real, with the student council spokesperson announcing another council activity report and asking the guests to introduce herself. Visibly shaken, Alia takes a while to realize and clumsily states her name, giving Yuki an opening to tease her about her nervousness. After explaining the situation to Kyu's, Alia confesses that she was a disaster on the program, and Kyu's becomes furious, realizing just how far Yuki is willing to go. Even so, he tells Alia not to beat herself up, because that's exactly what Yuki wants. Since the broadcast was in the morning, only a few students were at school, so Yuki wasn't trying to prove to everyone that she was better. She wanted to mess with Alia's mind, and it worked. Realizing that their rival got them good cues, laughs, fired up about the competition for the first time. In other words, things are about to get serious. In Russian, Alia finds herself falling for the determined look on his face. Later, she laments that she only wants to be president for her own sake. Kyu's snaps her out of it, reminding her that even though her motivation might not be as noble as Yuki's, she is still captivating, honest, and hardworking, which is why she should hold her head high and not feel inferior to her opponent. Alia jokes that his speech sounded more like a love confession, and Kyu's gives up, but the Russian admits that his words restored her confidence, even if Yuki is carrying the spirit of her deceased brother. That said, Kyu's, outwardly calm, is internally seething at his sister for making the school think he's dead. He tries to explain the truth, but Nonoa enters the room with Taniyama, both apologizing for what they did at the Congress. Taniyama also wants to know if Alia left her name out of the broadcast to protect her reputation, but Alia responds that she didn't want to claim victory in a Congress she didn't win. On the other hand, Taniyama believes she lost and wants to announce her defeat during the closing ceremony. Kyu's suggests another way to handle it, and after explaining how Nonoa and Taniyama decide to support Alia's candidacy. With that done, Kyu's declares that now they have a real chance to win the election, and that he'll destroy Yuki without mercy as a matter of honor. In the following days, he and his partner focused on practical presentation tests in the auditorium. On the last day of practice before the trimester ended, Kyu's affirmed that the girl was ready and only needed to replicate the training during the actual event. However, Alia didn't seem so confident, because despite having performed well at the student congress, she believed she only did so because she was focused on her own thoughts. Besides, tomorrow's audience would be even bigger. Kyu's didn't lie and confirmed that the auditorium would be swarming with people, but he emphasized that it didn't change what needed to be done, so she should focus solely on delivering her message. Still, the Russian girl insisted it wouldn't work, saying she realized this while watching Kyu speak at the Congress. She didn't believe she had the same talent as her friend to captivate the audience. Kyu's was honest, admitting that he didn't know where his talent came from, but he understood that much of it stemmed from experience. Speaking of which, he shared a trick with Alia to break the ice and grab the audience's attention. After receiving this tip, Alia Kujo decided to give it a shot on the day of the presentation. Suddenly, Yuki arrived unannounced and remarked that Masachika had a terrifying expression. He He responded that someone had tried to make a fool of him, but that the mask of the nasty one would soon fall. Incidentally, Q's confirmed that Yuki was exactly like that and that Alia shouldn't be deceived. Yuki asked if the Russian girl was upset with her for some reason, but Alia replied that there was no reason to be, as it was normal for people to behave differently in different situations. Alia then asked if Yuki was serious when she said she wanted them to remain friends, to which Yuki cynically responded yes. However, Alia said she hoped that was the case because Yuki had given her a chance to reflect on herself. After all, Yuki had questioned why Kujo wanted to be student council president, and Alia would have the answer for her tomorrow. The council's spokesperson emphasized that Alia's frank nature had finally come through, which made her a fascinating person. Q's sarcastically added that he was thrilled they were still friends, to which his sister quipped back that she also loved maintaining her friendship with him. By the way, she asked if Q's was upset with her, but he believed that attacking an opponent's vulnerabilities was a clear and obvious move. To summarize how he felt about his sister, it was like being torn between slapping your dog on the snout for daring to bite you, but also wanting to teach it a lesson so it never tries again. In this case, Yuki had taken a bite, but missed the chance to sink her teeth all the way in. Shortly after, Kanzaki arrived, breaking the tension in the room, with Sarashina and Masha eager to go over one last thing about tomorrow. He asked about the order of speeches, recalling that last year's candidates played Russian roulette to decide. Actually, it was rock, paper, scissors. Q's didn't think rock, paper, scissors would work, as you could just read your opponent to win that game. So Yuki suggested they flip a coin, and Masha volunteered to toss it. The rule was simple. If Alia guessed the coin toss correctly, she'd choose who would go first. If she guessed wrong, Yuki would decide. Without hesitation, the coin was tossed, and Yuki reflected on the strategy. If she spoke first and delivered a knockout blow, Alia would come in afterward with the audience already reeling. If she went second, the first speaker might receive polite applause, while the audience pondered, which couldn't happen. Yuki wanted a total devastating victory, so she needed to speak first. On the other hand, it might be wise to hear what her brother had to say first, since he was so skilled. Incidentally, Yuki noticed that he had tried everything to intimidate her, which wasn't typical of him, as he usually avoided drawing attention. Whatever the case, the coin landed in Masha's hand, and it was time for Alia to choose. Without a second thought, she picked heads, but it came up tails, meaning Yuki got to decide if she would speak first. Yuki mused whether her brother's threat was just for show or a distraction. It seemed that Masachika had tried to restore order after seeing Alia nearly in tears from being berated. Knowing that the Russian girl was emotionally fragile, he was probably trying to protect her. Considering that Alia was likely still reeling from yesterday's broadcast, Yuki analyzed that the pressure would build to unbearable levels if Alia spoke last, especially since Masachika's goal was probably to go first and receive polite applause, creating a sense of a tie. With everything settled, Yuki Siwu chose to speak first. The next day, during the closing ceremony, it was time for the student council presentation, beginning with President Kanzaki Toya. He and other members made remarks about the trimester before the arrival of summer break, and finally it was time for the presidential candidates to take the stage. As previously decided, Yuki Siwu opened the debate. The lights dimmed and a spotlight focused on the podium. Yuki asked if Ayano was ready, and her subordinate confirmed she was. With that, Yuki stepped onto the stage, greeted the students present, and reintroduced herself as a candidate for next year's student council president. After that, some students made a point of declaring their votes for her. Yuki announced her first proposal. If elected, she would create an academy that seriously considered student opinions through a suggestion box. Despite being at the school for years, few students had used it, and Siwu knew this was because no one believed that any real change would happen, which was understandable given that most council members were busy dealing with the challenges of their new positions, so caught up in their duties that they neglected the students' needs. However, Yuki assures everyone that she will make these wishes come true. For instance, the changes in the types of sporting competitions, or the adjustment and expansion of school festival events, as well as the introduction of new events like Halloween or Christmas. Having already served as the president of the student council in middle school, and now being in high school with the experience and history to back her up, Yuki believes she's in a unique position to make all this happen. That said, Yuki Siwu thanks everyone for listening and concludes her presentation. Backstage, Q's remarks that the girl made one empty promise after another without saying anything concrete, but Kanzaki admits that even so it was a brilliant speech and that Yuki is better than he could ever be. party, Masha asks if her sister is okay, and she responds that she is, but that she should be left alone for now. Next, Kimishima Iono steps up to the podium and introduces herself as Yuki's running mate. Outside of school, she serves as Yuki Suu's personal assistant and believes her boss to be a person of extraordinary talent and exemplary conduct with unmatched empathy and kindness. Behind the curtain, Q's comments that these girls are trying to kill the game before Alia even takes the field, but the Russian girl remains focused. He remembers that this part of the event is the student council leaders address, the perfect time for Alia to introduce herself to the audience and let everyone get to know her. Meanwhile, Ayano stops singing Yuki's praises and wraps up her speech. The two girls stand before the audience to receive their well-deserved applause. Now it's Alisa Kujo's turn, the student council treasurer. As Alia walks to the podium, the audience is still buzzing from the previous speeches, convinced that this election is already won. That's when Alia leaves everyone confused by taking a deep breath and starting to speak in Russian. This tactic surprises everyone, drawing their focus entirely to her as she keeps her speech in her native language for several seconds. Finally, she switches back to Japanese, admitting that she was too nervous, which is why she started in Russian. With that, the crowd wonders if it was some kind of joke, letting out a few chuckles. The day before, Q's had suggested this trick to Alia. He told her that if they were running second, she should begin her speech in Russian because the audience would still be fixated on the previous candidate's speech, and this strategy would throw cold water on them. So Alisa Kujo starts her real presentation, admitting she doesn't yet have a political track record to be proud of since she only recently transferred to the school. She also confesses that she doesn't fully understand the duties of the council or the in-person responsibilities, but she isn't afraid to take that on because there's one thing she can proudly say. Alisa is someone who works harder than anyone else and has always put in her best effort to achieve the ideal result she envisions. She believes people should never rest on their laurels after an achievement and should always aim higher. It's true that sometimes Alia's motivation sows discord, causing her to fail, but she learned from those mistakes and helped her class win the award for the best attraction at last year's festival. Of course, she didn't do it alone, and she knows there's still a lot she needs to improve on to become a good student council president. As she expresses these thoughts, Alia remembers when Q's told her how motivated, serious, and hardworking she is, and that's why she must keep moving forward. She continues her speech saying that even though she has many flaws, she had the courage to come and speak in front of everyone with her own words straight from her heart, and she will make up for what's lacking one step at a time. With that, she promises to withdraw her candidacy if she doesn't feel up to the task, but until then she asks everyone to pay attention to what she's doing politically. She ends her speech and the audience's applause gradually grows. Q's Masachika congratulates his partner, saying it's time to win, and takes the stage. The first thing he does is declare that he was the one running things behind the scenes when Yuki was president. By saying this, he strikes a low-profile protagonist pose who operates in the shadows, and the crowd bursts into laughter. With the atmosphere more relaxed, he confirms that he really was Yuki Suu's vice president, and imagines everyone wants to know why he's not running alongside her again. The truth is he let her go because the ideal president of the council should be someone with the charisma to draw people in. As strange as Alia's speech was, Q's insists it was also genuine and sincere, and that's why he chose to support the Russian instead of Yuki. To prove the support Alia's gaining, Q's announces that Taniyama and Nonoa will join the council as officers once Alia becomes president. That's right, former debate rivals will now work together. Saying this, Q's brings the two onto the stage, leaving everyone in shock. The four members of the slate thank everyone for their support and are greeted by enthusiastic applause from the crowd. Q's tells Alia that she was the one responsible for this achievement. After this spectacle, Taniyama declares that she's now even with Alia and reminds her that she won't be helping with the campaign anymore, unlike Nonoa, who says she'll be by the new president's side, though she accidentally mispronounces Alia's name. Looking directly at her opponent, the Russian girl reflects that she will become president and won't be controlled by Yuki anymore. On the other side, Yuki acknowledges her defeat in this battle, but the war isn't over yet. Later, Q's finds out he ranked 33rd in the school's grade average, so he lost the bet that he'd be in the top 30, and now he has to do whatever Alia asks. In Russian, the girl complains that she thought he would win because that's what she wanted. Embarrassed, Q's asks to be called by his first name, arguing that now they're recognized as a united team. With that, Alia Alia calls him Masachika, and the two are left blushing, not knowing where to hide their faces. As they leave the school, Masachika says they'll need to prepare for the election even during summer vacation. Alia, speaking in Russian, asks the boy to look at her and replies that it would be her great pleasure.